How do you mean what?
Well, I mean, that's how they know that the difference between the dates.
Yeah.
We should do like a coin episode someday.
That would be really cool. This is really cool.
But yeah.
This is really super cool.
Welcome to the Wednesday Club.
Oh, come on.
Hi. I brought a lot.
You did that on purpose.
I did. I went to a convention this weekend, a very, very fun convention, and I bought many ridiculous things. So I've been showing off all the silly things that I got at the convention. Hi, everybody.
Today we're going to talk about the sheer madness of thinking anybody would care about comics on the internet. It's Webcomic Day at long
like 2.5, 3 years long.
.com.
Yeah, at long.com.
/long con.
/archive.
Yeah. /archive.
Sorry, it's been
Slash-
.html.
Some of these have
The
been hard to find,
GeoCities,
man.
right?
I hit some bad links this week looking for some of this.
Oh, Internet Archive is your friend. My name is Amy Dallen. This is Taliesin Jaffe. This is Matt Key.
I am Matt Key.
And we are going to talk, one of my favorite things about doing this as a topic is that we have now reached a phase where it no longer makes sense as a topic.
Because they're
that.
just comics that
Because
happen
they're
to be
just
on the internet.
Comics.
Yeah.
And now the internet is where you do all the things. It's where you buy your groceries. It's where you make stuff. It's where you read stuff. It's like, but there was this solid period of time where the term webcomic kind of, to a certain group of people, meant a certain thing and then transformed and got reinvented in every space where it is possible to share pictures. So we're going to hit as much of it as we can tonight, but there is 100% chance that somebody out there watching is going to be sad because we don't mention your faves. So please shout your fave at us and each other in the chat, and we will try to every so often round up a crop of those because that's real fun to do.
Just to be weird. Well, I know we've all got things to say. Just does anybody remember the first time they saw a web page?
Like a
Any
website?
Like like someone showed you what a web browser was on a computer and opened up a web page? Because I remember the first time I saw it.
Really?
Because I'm old.
Because you're a vampire.
Because I'm a vampire.
Yeah, you're immortal.
I do actually remember.
What is this talking glowing box?
I remember my friend Brad, who's a computer programmer, and being at his house. He says, "Check this out," and like hit a thing because we all had modems, but they were the ones that sound like the opening of the Cranberry song.
I love the way that you said it is like he goes, check this out. And
I mean,
he
like,
hits it and like Pink Floyd plays
Oh.
and like you just like rack focus
You
on
were-
it. You were just like, what?
You are not wrong. Like there was Pink Floyd playing. Like that was that apartment. It was that friend with that apartment, and like slowly this just like text with a picture showed up, and we were like, this is the craziest thing we'd ever seen. It was not. Before that, we just had the news groups, and that's all that the internet was. And bought.
I remember the first time I saw a CD-ROM, and it blew my mind when I was
Really?
in middle school. Yeah,
Under what circumstances?
like we had a computer lab in our school, and that computer lab had 8 computers. That
Was it the difference between that and a floppy disk like blew your mind, or?
Well, no, it was. I think it was like
Tiny laser disc.
no, it was the tiny laser disc thing, but it was like the fact that like encyclopedias existed on this thing.
That was a big deal.
Like that blew my mind.
Encarta!
And like they could be animated. I was like, all the learning I can do. But then they also had like I want to say it was Arthur and the School Bus, like Magic School Bus. Not Art. No.
Those are two different things, but
Yeah,
they
you're
should
right.
have a crossover.
What am I thinking?
Make it happen.
I think it was just Arthur, and like you could walk with him into school, and I was just like, this is the future. Like no one ever talks about CD-ROMs anymore because they all exist online, but you don't need a CD-ROM anymore.
Some of us remember CD-ROMs, and they oddly came up earlier today. So apparently, it's just that kind of day for me.
I should digress you one more time. I'm so sorry that I keep.
Speaking of
reeling-
current media, what have you got for us?
I did go to this ridiculous convention. Which
How
I
was
love.
LostCon?
LostCon was great. LostCon it's a wonderful little time capsule back into the 1980s. It's a very unique vibe of a convention, which is why I keep going, is because there's nothing like it. They've like it's like finding a bunch of nerds in a missile silo who haven't been out, and so like it's like you can talk about your favorite television shows and they all kind of go, that's great, but that's not really why we're here. We're here to talk about science fiction. You're like, whoa! I love them so much. So I brought a little bit of treasured past back for both of you, and I couldn't figure out who to give what to, so I'm just going to make an arbitrary arbitrary handing off.
And we, by the way, started out with the ancient coins that Tal brought back from this
I
time
did.
travel trip he just went on.
I've got plans for these. I'm very excited. At some point they'll come up. I got myself a novelization of the Addams Family called Monster Rally.
Oh, that is
by Charles
awesome.
Addams. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh,
Yep. So that's what I got for myself.
oh my God, amazing.
For my burst thought for you was I found the novelization of the House of Mystery series by Jack Olek.
Oh my God!
Which I was like, that's
what?
This is a Wrightson cover.
Is that with Swamp Thing and everything?
Well, he's from House of Secrets. House of Mystery would be.
yeah.
different-
I delved to
I
find
saw,
something that
like,
looked a little interesting. I have no idea. These are really fascinating, like comic book novelizations.
Okay, I need to show y'all the inside of this, but I don't want to break the binding. I don't know.
It's a book. It's a book.
It's supposed
Although
to-
I will
it's
say
supposed
the man who sold it to me was very, very, and I say smug in the best way. If he's like, well, I know that you're worried about reading it, but some of us can read our books and still leave them in mint condition. And I was like, whoa.
Well, he can enjoy his
So he was-
skills.
he was like,
unless
"It
he
can be
wants
done."
to YouTube tutorial that shit for the rest of us.
I
So
have
this
to
was
explain YouTube to him. He was lovely.
1973, which means they had just invented Swamp Thing.
Mm-hmm.
This whole book is with pictures by Bernie Wrightson, and I'm just gonna find the slimmest possible opening so that y'all can see.
I'm gonna have to move the cactus. There we go.
God, the coloring on this cover is so modern.
It's really got
compared
a-
to 1973 comics.
It's got a vibe, isn't
So
it?
striking.
okay, that
And
is
then
in
you
Swamp
need to look at this.
Yep. Look at that. Oh.
Okay, where's the
Okay.
inset today?
All right, there we are.
Yes,
Oh,
just barely.
isn't that
I'm not
beautiful?
opening it anymore. I'm sorry. This is all we can do
It looks like Man Thing made a guest spot.
with the host. It does. It really does. And they would have just invented Swamp Thing.
So I found something particularly weird for you that I think,
Oh.
like, I couldn't decide who would, like, I finally decided I thought you would get a better kick out of this. Take a second.
What?
Take a second to, like,
What?
absorb what the fuck that is.
I'm looking at the back. What?
I have to
You'll
show-
laugh, you'll cry, you'll love every minute with this courageous, confused, and crazy new cartoon soap opera, The Virtue of Vera Valiant, by Stan Lee and Frank Springer.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a thing that this was like one of like another attempt for Stan Lee to write a romance comic for a little while that they then like published into a little.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Vera Valiant?
I was so torn.
This is amazing.
Yeah, look at this. This was quite a fun.
Warner Paperback
I had difficulty like even discovering what this was on the internet. Like this was like a hard thing to even Google.
Wow.
This is
We
amazing.
may have to just do a giant trade-off at some point.
We will have to
Thank
share all
you.
of these.
So
I
had
will
a
let
lot
you
of
look
fun.
at my House of
Yeah, yeah.
Mystery there if you.
So yeah, no, it's an awful
Wow.
lot.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, Wednesday Club, thanks for joining us while we look at
While
books.
Taliesin brings books in that thoroughly stun everybody. I'm so sorry. Yeah, this was a very good find this weekend. I had quite a bit of fun.
Wrightson is just
So this is copyright 1976 by Los Angeles Times. It must have been
Yeah.
cut and pasted from a newspaper strip.
Did Wrightson ever draw the Joker?
I don't know.
Because look at this
Oh wow,
drawing
that's such a
that
beautiful.
could absolutely be the Joker.
Here.
Like, if he didn't draw the Joker while he was around,
See, we
that
get
is a
the
tragedy.
camera up. There we are. Oh yeah, no, that's a Batman murder mystery happening right there. Look at that.
This is.
It'll take me a
amazing.
few weeks to read a couple of these, but we'll let you know if we have time. I'll definitely get through my Charles Adams and let everybody know.
76 and 77.
Yeah, we may have to flip these around.
Published by the New American Library Incorporated. First printing.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about webcomics, everybody.
So no, I do this
Cutting-edge
specifically.
technology.
I mean, like, and I thought this might be fun also because one of the interesting things is I found that some of the webcomics that I grew up or in my teen years I loved were kind of hard to find and a little obscure now. It's interesting. There's phases of them.
So this is the other thing. There have been so many lives to it, and these are actually pretty appropriate because what I'm holding here is an attempt to do a mass market paperback of a syndicated newspaper comic strip that was aiming for the television soap opera watching audience, but inspired by the romance comics of 30 years before. And it is this versatility of sort of like things that just evolve and turn into other things and get repackaged. Everything that you see on this table was originally published online or is the indirect result, as we will see, of webcomics. I brought To Be or Not to Be, which is the best.
Yeah, and I'm amazed already of the number of things I don't know here. I mean, I know quite a few of them, but quite a few of them I don't.
Well, I mean,
I just-
such fondly remembered milestones as MySpace Dark Horse Presents.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Check out the contributor list on this. There have been many
Whoa.
attempts.
Hey, Stan. Oh, wow.
Wow.
LeVar Burton? Wow.
Simon Spurrier.
Jimmy Hernandez. Holy.
Sakai,
Gabriel
wow.
Ba. Holy shit.
Wow.
So
Wow.
these comics were literally published on MySpace when MySpace was a thing, because there have been over and over, we keep reinventing the idea of trying to do like what the relationship between comics and the internet is. And sometimes it means taking stuff from successful print mediums and successful print authors and putting them online. Show that off.
I also get to do this because this may be the first time I'm going to be a little smug about this one. Amy, what is MySpace? It's funny for two reasons.
Right. More context. So the story of webcomics is also the story of the internet, and that will
beautiful.
recur tonight, because what we said earlier about like any place that you can share an image is a place where comics crop up. So that has meant that the history of webcomics has been governed a lot by the places people are spending their time and the way they communicate on the internet. So for instance, there was an era where you were mostly like going to different sites to read things. It was the heyday of blogs, the heyday of standalone websites, or you would RSS feed them all together. And that was like, I got
Webwing,
distracted
even.
from MySpace.
I found a web ring.
Web ring?
I
Oh my
found a
gosh.
web ring this
Okay.
week doing this.
Oh,
My God.
We have to do the history of the internet while we do this. But MySpace was an early social media site. Most of you won't remember. It was before Facebook.
Face page.
It was.
I don't even know what
It was like
anymore.
it was Facebook where everyone actually had to like fight for each other's attention because you just picked 8 people that you really liked.
There was a mechanic in it where you
Oh,
listed your 8
man.
closest friends.
The top
or something.
8, and then it
Top
became the
8.
top 12 because,
know.
and it's like, well, that doesn't solve anything because.
I kind of
Now-
didn't.
now-
I was an LJ kid during MySpace.
Oh, yeah.
LiveJournal,
Yeah.
which was a
Feel
different
that.
space that gave rise to a different set of comics.
I have a couple of them here. I'm very
Yeah,
excited for
I
my live
actually
journal comics.
remember having arguments with friends who were offended they weren't in my top 8. They were like,
Oh my goodness.
like
It caused fights.
yeah, they were like, oh, I mean, I was in your top. I was like, I have to rotate out because I have a lot of people that I love. I'm sorry. Like, there's no offense here. I still love you a lot. Like,
I'm a
Oh my
Rolling Stone. I gotta be
gosh.
free. gotta keep rolling those 8.
idiot. Sorry.
I love you.
You idiot.
So, I would say like, Dad, it's
Here you
Oh,
go, baby.
no,
I got
it's
you.
okay.
I got you.
Got a
sweetheart.
room. Got a
There we
room. Thank you.
it's sort of like it's very hard to divide webcomics up into proper eras, but there's sort of like there's the proto beginnings from 80s and early 90s, which is just sort of literally the first attempts to digitize images and share them around.
Well, we didn't have a lot of tools. I mean, that's the thing. People, if they want to remember anything from this time period, because this was like the point where people had just finally gotten the Macintoshes with the single mouse and the black and white screen, and like there were not a lot of good paint tools. Paint tools were thin, and downloading images took time. I mean, people did it, but like sharing anything other than text information, and a good portion of the internet, especially right before the web, was text. Well, if you wanted an image, that's like a minute and a half a picture if you have really fast internet.
And conventions for processing and displaying pictures
We're very
weren't consistently a thing until early 90s and the invention of what we know as the World Wide Web, right? I'm not a specialist in the history of technology, but this stuff does come up a lot.
I thankfully grew up amongst a lot of very tech-savvy people, and so was often at not the full-on vanguard of it, but like the minute the consumer-grade technology usually hit, I would know somebody who was playing with it. So like I was very fortunate to kind of get a window seat to an awful lot of this, especially amongst the anime fandom of the time was very internet fluent, extremely internet fluent, especially for like which sounds weird saying this, but especially for like a sci-fi and fandom. They were kind of there first, which was weird, but
Well, and a lot of, there was a high overlap between early adopters of technology and people with other niche nerdy interests,
Very.
which is a subject that we can spend a lot of time on. But it means that especially once you hit the mid to late 90s, you get your first generation of lasting and significant, really, webcomics. I think conventionally credit for the first one goes to one from the mid-'80s, which was like a sword and sorcery parody comic. But the means weren't there to widely circulate that. So like landmark-wise, and there is a tie here to like the forms of comics and the types of storytelling which tend to predominate are also in part shaped by the way that you're sharing them and the intended uses. And so a lot of webcomics as we knew them, especially in the first 15 years of them being common, which I'm roughly saying 95 to 2010, were inspired like close in style and presentation to newspaper comics. To syndicated, to comic strips, which is a huge area of comics that we don't tend to talk about as much, but like has been going on side by side as an art form, along with comic books since the 30s and predates them.
They started it, and that's where it started.
Probably still have a higher readership and popularity across the world than the comic books we mostly talk about. Like in theory,
it is interesting. I think manga takes everybody
manga
lunch
is manga
in that sense, but
manga is also its own weird periodical thing. The way that they publish it is kind of unique. So
and when you think about it, it's a lot of it is shaped by how do you get people your new comics? How often do they come out? And how much do you give them at a time? Those are the big sort of questions of like comic book delivery in anything other than one standalone work. So one of the common models is like if you can do it every day for a newspaper, then it becomes part of people's routine and the way they read it, and it's not designed to be binge read in any way. So 1995, they put Dilbert online. Most people aren't on the internet yet, but Dilbert, and I'm just going to talk in historical terms about 90s Dilbert, was a newspaper comic strip that dealt with like office life and sort of tech-savvy people who were surrounded
He had
by
like the
people who
tie
didn't
that was
understand
always
things.
like
Yep.
it was
askance.
office jokes with a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah. It made 90s Amy laugh a lot.
It was one of those comics where you read it and you go, Dilbert. That was my reaction.
Or everyone
to
around Dilbert, really.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
also
I just remember. I remember reading it. Like I wouldn't be doing.
I remember reading, going, "I'm not going to work in an
Dilbert.
office when I'm an adult." And
See, my dad was in IT, so I was just like, aha. His big joke was that he started out as Dilbert and he ended up as the pointy-haired boss. And I will say, if you're self-aware enough to be worried that you're the pointy-haired boss, you're not the pointy-haired boss. But
That's what you
this
still tell
is-
your dad, right?
I
To
should.
this day.
So this is, I note this merely because it was a match of subject matter and tone and early adopter internet that makes an interesting landmark. We wouldn't generally consider it a webcomic. It was still a nationally syndicated comic strip
But
that
it was a
primarily
comic
appears.
on the web.
Yeah, and 95 was pretty early to be regularly updating
Super
a
early.
comic on the web. So essentially, within a few years of that, we have the beginnings of an explosion whose impacts are still being felt today. Two comics are having their 20th anniversaries right now, this year.
Really?
Two comics you might have heard of.
God. All right, bring
One
it.
is called PvP.
oh wow!
It's 20 years old.
Oh, I feel old. Okay.
They are currently kickstarting a 20th anniversary collection. And the other one, which might be familiar to those of you who have played a video game, you know this.
I probably do, and I'm blanking because
They started a charity, and then they started a convention.
Penny Arcade.
Oh my God, Penny
Arcade is 20 years old.
Penny Arcade, because they kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
They started the
Wow.
same year, which at the
Jeez.
time, like, it didn't feel like this is the year people will start these strips. But like in 1998, the internet has grown by leaps and bounds, and while not yet the universal fixture it is today, is achieving a mass audience. But still, there is a heavy sort of like correlation or overlap between people who are just sort of wandering around looking for stuff and other nerdy interests, especially technology. And so
We still had portals at that point. I mean, like your access to the internet was very, very complicated.
Yeah.
How you got it, and how much internet you got because of those portals.
and I'm,
Wow.
of course, wildly oversimplifying. In 1997, they were already putting together the first collectives. There was something called Big Panda. I'm not as familiar with this one, but it eventually was the home to Sluggy Freelance, which was one of the first sort of ongoing adventure strips.
Now you're making me think of it.
I don't know Sluggy Freelance.
I remember, Sluggy Freelance.
I've read big chunks of Sluggy Freelance. I don't think I ever finished it. It's long. There's a lot of Sluggy Freelance.
Yeah?
It was sort of a science fiction adventure told sort of in the form of a conventional comic strip, but just that went on over years. And these were key community building years for the internet. And these comics that emerged that people started to share with each other in these early strips hits and these early collectives went on to shape a lot of what they for instance, Penny Arcade has been fairly or unfairly blamed for inspiring 18,000 imitators that were all people on couches talking about video games.
Yeah.
Speaking as three people sitting on a couch talking about comic books, I think that seems normal.
Yeah,
This is what people do.
But it was, started by a couple of dudes in their basement or whatever, in their one-room apartment, wherever they lived at the time. I pulled an image of the very first Penny Arcade because I didn't mean, there's going to be, I made 2 pages of wild notes, and then they're not going to happen in any order.
You made 2 pages of crazy person notes.
I did.
There was a few, and I was looking up a thing because there was definitely I definitely noticed a few different things. At first, there were some strips that popped up that everyone was reading, and then there was, and I don't want to jump ahead, but there was a moment where suddenly, at least I remember this from the LiveJournal days. God, I both miss and don't miss LiveJournal. That there was a moment when I realized that I could read comic strips by people who didn't know how to draw, and that kind of. The minute that people started, there's a whole, I don't know at what point.
What's the stick figure one? X.
Oh, there's a couple of them. XKCD is one of the more modern ones.
Yeah, that one killed me the first time I saw that online. I was like, wait, you can do this with stick figures?
I mean, it does kind of open things up.
Yeah. It was one of the first times where I was like, I'm actually entertained by this, and it's not very good drawing, but the words and the content and the story,
All right,
oh
here's
man.
the first ever Penny Arcade.
Oh yeah, let's take a look at that.
Sometime 1998.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
Wow.
A joke about a video game called Sin, which is mostly remembered, I think, now for being the subject of the first ever Penny Arcade. It's about how long it takes to load. His main character still wearing that blue sweater to this day. Here is a sample of the art these days. It's been a while since I regularly followed this strip, but I couldn't leave them out of this.
No, there was. I mean,
rundown.
there were times. I think for a lot of us where this was, and especially I remember during the LiveJournal years, there were definitely times where the LiveJournal MySpace era that discussions with this was a comic book that would create mass discussion, both positive and negative across the internet, where we would really topics of the day would come up, and it was something to be discussed. Almost along the lines of Doonesbury, of not to be too but yeah, it was it was an important book and people did take notice.
So I will say, then we get, by the year 2000, we get one of the most influential early collectives, which was Keen Spot. And these years are marked mostly by people not being able to agree on how to describe them because everyone was getting into arguments all the time because this was the there is no peak time for getting into arguments on the internet, but each era has its own flavor of getting into arguments on the internet. And flame wars were a big part of this era. So there was Keen Spot, which was sort of a free collective that you kind of had to apply for membership. Keen Space, which was a bunch of side comics. In 2002, there was one called Modern Tales, which was supposed to be a more curated subscription model that had a much smaller base. And there were these big fights going on already in 2002 over this idea of whether you could get people to pay for things on the internet. But Modern Tales spun off sub areas like Girl-O-Matic and Webcomics Nation, and a lot of folks who had come from indie cartooning and folks who were brand new to cartooning found spaces here. So there were artists like Leah Hernandez, who was already publishing, I think she was at Image before this, who sort of realized, Image was very different back then, and she was having trouble sort of getting through to the audience that would appreciate her stuff. She had a book called Rumble Girls. And it was basically this was the late 90s. Girls were getting into manga, everybody was reading lots of things, but it was not always possible to connect the artist with their audience. and that's where the internet came in. So Leah Hernandez was an early adopter of webcomic technology. I wrote down within a few years, like this flowering of early comics meant that all kinds of folks, like anytime a medium is suddenly more accessible, folks who might not have gotten through the doors traditionally start getting through the door and getting to share their work. And there's still different kinds of barriers in terms of like, is your work going to be more shareable if it looks like the things people expect, or if it's subject matter that's already, Penny Arcade was an outlier, but once it became normal for everything to be video game jokes, was it harder for other people to get through? At the time, these were big and important arguments, and they still are. But when you look back, we got an astonishing variety of work within a few years of all of this starting.
Well, I will say, like, one of the things that I've noticed, especially about the earlier stuff, is that it tended to be done by, like, incredibly intelligent people, like computer engineers, mathematicians, like people like with high operating like IQs seem to be behind at least, I mean, that's the ones that I was finding.
Probably because those are the.
But they were the ones who knew how to use the technology, like the early adopters,
It's interesting because people with an interest in that were more likely to find it easy to figure out the tools to put their stuff up. And their interests might have tended to lie in more sort of like academic and STEMmy areas. What's interesting is that like by the time we get to it being very easy to put your images up and share them, like art quality goes way up. Like webcomics people joke around now where they're just sort of like, that era when no one needed to be able to draw because there were only 100 webcomics and you could basically read all of them and everyone was just hungry for more comics. I think that does somewhat of a disservice to the creativity of a lot of these folks that I read. But it is, there's I don't know, IQ is obviously not a very useful measure, but like it's hard to sit there and debate the brilliance of someone who's expressing themselves in visual forms that have nothing to do with technology versus sort of people in this like conventional.
I think it was more. It was just self-selecting of the. I can speak to just remember being around at the time. Is that there was just no reason to be on the internet yet if you weren't using it for
like scholarly reasons or like
look up it wasn't even
your bill or
scholarly.
something.
It was literally just it was like owning a very expensive erector set. It's not that it isn't cool. It's just that that's a very specific person who's going to be really into that. And
or like to a certain extent, the internet was part of people's hobby at that point. And therefore, like as opposed to just like it's just the internet. Like I'm not into the water that comes out of my faucet.
No, I remember a month-long conversation about the IP of Qtip.com and whether or not the person who actually owned Qtip.com or the people who created Q-tips owned Qtip.com, and there was a huge fight about it. And it was literally just a Q-tip fan page at the time, a fan page for Q-tips. And then eventually,
Hey, dude, there's a lot to celebrate about.
he eventually got very disheartened by the whole thing, and eventually turned it into a Q-tip fan page for pool cues. So it was just a fan page for the tips of cues for pool. It was a huge, but like this was like a big
for everybody on the internet.
Well, I mean, like it sounds hilarious right now, but like there were like genuine things being figured out, and the people online. I mean, and it seemed really silly to everybody on the exterior of it. There were not a lot of people online, and the people online had money. They had access to the tools. They had free time.
There were a mix of people with disposable income and very broke students.
Yes, and like any institution where you could get at it.
Yeah.
And it was, and there was those institutional kids, and then the occasional teenagers who were just starting to figure out how to use all of these tools to be.
Waves of teenagers have invented every portion of
Yes.
the internet. It just looks different every time a new wave of teenagers reshapes the internet after themselves.
I don't recognize it anymore, so I'm afraid of it.
That's fair. It's more afraid of you than you are. No, it's really not.
No,
It's okay.
it does not fear any of us.
No, it does not.
Carla Speed McNeil was the other name I was going for.
Yes.
A bunch of fantastic talent in those early years. Folks who, it's a mix of people who were sort of started doing their work online and kind of figured out the art tools as they went, and people who came with the art tools and adapted to the internet. And that'll recur throughout this discussion.
And I don't think anybody was figuring out how to monetize this for a very long time.
And that was another big
yeah.
discussion. So
Monetization was always a conversation.
and in some ways continues to be because it changes every couple years.
It is.
So-
It's weird.
This book,
Oh man. Oh man.
is a wonderful part. So you have heard us talk before about Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is sort of by far the best known and pretty much well respected, like basic primer on what comics are, told in the form of a comic, because he is kind of a genius. I'm going to throw in an unnecessary plug here for if you're on Alpha, you have to go check out his episodes of Roundtable, because just listening to him talk about comics is incredible. So he had written Understanding Comics in the early 90s, I think published in 93. And in the year 2000, he published a book called Reinventing Comics, because he was already looking forward to, like, okay, what's next? How will technology change things? What will happen with comics? He made a lot of sort of guesses. And what's funny is that I remember being on the internet in the early 2000s and people being 10,000s?
Wow.
Time travel.
How are comics 8,000 years in the future, Amy?
I don't know.
Spider-Man may be dead. We're not sure.
Sorry. When Stacy's back for its 17th time.
So a lot of this at the time was sort of, people were like, no one's gonna pay money in small amounts for internet content. And then, 7 years later, the Apple
Microtransactions
Store.
never happen.
Yeah, that wasn't a term when this was written. So some of the things obviously will come to pass and some of them never will. But
I feel bad for anybody who,
yeah, it gave rise to important concepts like he was sort of like, if we're not limited by paper size, the infinite canvas becomes a thing. Now, as it turned out, the infinite canvas, meaning that your comic can be literally any size and people can just, like, a website doesn't dictate that, it turned out not to be a dominant paradigm because people are still viewing it through screens. But we've watched screen size affect comic book format because initially that's why comic books on the web tended to be landscape instead of portrait. And now there is, as of the early 2000s, and then the early 2010s in South Korea, and the mid 2010s all over, a formatting change may be coming to comics again because of something called webtoons, which came out of South Korea and is basically phone native comics that are designed to be written by scrolling up and down, read by scrolling up and down. It sort of, we're still less than a decade into that one, so we don't know what its kind of long-term playout will be. And then, of course, you have comics that are native to Instagram have a totally different
I was just about
format.
to say, Brittany, like my lovely wife Brittany, take a drink of water, stay hydrated, has gotten me into Instagram comics a lot.
Excellent. You need to share Instagram comics with us.
There's that Rick and Morty one. That's amazing.
Oh, I don't know the Rick and Morty one.
The Rick and Morty one is the one that I'm most used to because it was a series of images, and clicking on different places, and each image would take you to different panels, which in turn would take you to different panels. And it was a giant. I mean, like, the best way to describe it is just this intense four-dimensional dodecahedron of a story that just wrapped around itself infinitely. It was quite intense.
And that was on Instagram?
I believe that was an Instagram piece. There was also, and you also, I don't know if this counts, but the Marvel Infinite books.
It's on my list, but where do they fit into the timeline?
They're very recent because
those are like 20.
Not that recent anymore.
Oh God,
2012-ish. Maybe earlier.
The first one that I remember, although it's probably more like the second or third one to come out, was Avengers versus X-Men.
Mm-hmm. And that was circa 2012.
Yeah.
God, time.
Yeah, 2012 doesn't sound like it was that long ago.
So what was a Marvel Infinite comic?
A Marvel Infinite comic, and you can actually, I believe you can download Avengers vs. X-Men Infinite for free on Comixology, is really interesting. Was somebody taking advantage of the fact that the screen of the kind of both my favorite and least favorite thing about reading a traditional comic book on the internet, which is the panel-to-panel play. Which is the fact that because your screen is sometimes a lot smaller than a traditional comic book, you can focus in on a panel and kind of move the screen like a microscope across the page. But they thought if you don't really need the page, why not just have it so that there's a panel, and then when you click forward, as you would in the panel by panel, instead of shifting to the next panel, it would just move you through the story in this very intense. Sometimes
the art would kind of just like change in that one panel, then change again.
Sometimes
but there were individual transitions that made it different from sort of a motion comic or another pseudo-animated kind.
Yeah, sometimes it would just be text popping up for the story. Sometimes they would actually have a shift of perspective within the image. Sometimes it would be a data screen that would pop up. Sometimes it would be a fade to the next scene. sometimes be fade to black. They would actually have like cuts like a film. It made a very cinematic effect. I don't
But they
necessarily.
retained the feel of being comics because you could still go back and forth between them. You were still controlling the flow of information, and essentially you would arrive at each new thing without there wasn't like an elaborate dance sequence in between. So it still felt like comics, but also different, which made very memorable for me.
It was like comics with just a strain of film DNA. Like it was really, and it also meant that the writer could decide at what speed you read, which I thought was really interesting. And if you download Infinite, you can see that is he'll do things like, boom, text, 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 and like it actually has to. It's not just the boxes with the narration that you have to read, but the fact that the boxes themselves that you have to flip to the next sequence to get to the next chunk of narration.
And like it moves, so like your eye starts at the top of the panel, but then as you flip,
I mean, I can actually.
that word disappears. Now the next one appears, and the
I'm
next
gonna be
one,
this
then the
guy.
next one. Like
I'm just going to pull it up while we talk
I,
really quick.
I remember like they did. That was like during like 2012. That was what was the event during?
Avengers versus X-Men.
Avengers versus X-Men.
Because they I remember for whatever reason,
AVX.
the very first motion comic I ever read, Infinite comic, was the Guardians ones that they were putting out. Like they were putting out special Guardians ones around like 2013, I think maybe, in anticipation of the movie. And I remember reading one that was like Gamora, and it was like her just like fighting, but the way you flip through it, like she like the carnage like kind of piled around her as she fought, but she was moving, and like it was almost like reading animation the way that it was drawn. Like it was
All right,
so
I've got
cool.
one. If I wanted to show a couple panels
Sure.
of it.
Show off some of those transitions. And this is interesting because it's one notable for us experiment in a series of people trying to tackle this question of like, okay, if we're not limited by paper, what can or should we add? What tools make sense for us to use in our story?
right.
And like, what is the actual future of this medium on this platform?
All that distance, light years, parsecs, such a long home, and I need to be there. Now. Faster. I got to do this. I can. I'm Nova. And then we split. Everything I ever loved is counting on me. Everything. My friends, my family, some of them, I mean. I love them. My dad. I mean, what else do I love? Sports Center. Snickers. Dubstep. Oh, God, he's such a bro. The Cardinals. Everything. I love everything on earth, and please don't you take it from me. And then look at this.
Can't stop, can't fight. It's right behind me.
Devouring every planet in its path. Its only job is to survive, to keep
right.
moving, to get there, and watch this. Click. And the Phoenix, and immediately we shift, yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. In print, you would repeat the panel with that difference. Digitally, it's not necessary. But clearly, what we're looking at is not exactly animation. It is not a film that unfolds over time in a specific way. It is graphic storytelling.
Yeah, you can just watch how it moves. I know I'm going fast, but I'm kind of trying to give you a sense. It's really got a great flow to it. And like this is a way, and just look at the way they pull the top panel closer and closer and just create all of this movement. It's really a fascinating experiment. They haven't done a lot of these, and I don't think they were particularly successful, although you can't quote me on that.
Well,
But,
and what's
like-
interesting is letting people know about these experiments has been an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it's
What are the
really-
credits on this? That looks kind of imminent. Even.
I'll find it. I can. There we go.
There we go. Mark Waid and Stuart Immonen.
And it's really, and like I
Yeah,
will say, of
that
all
makes
the
sense.
ones I've read, and I haven't read all of them, this is the one that understands. Like a lot of them, I feel like they didn't really know what to do with the tools. It was like handing a fine artist their first copy of Mac Paint, and they're like, what is like? It's not a tool that they're.
I mean, the thing is, though, like there is like a lot of innovation in there. There's
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
of creativity. Like I actually really like them. You know,
I don't think we've
for
seen
whatever
the end
reason,
of it.
like I don't think we've seen the end of it. I do think that like at least with the ones that I've seen from Marvel, I don't even know if DC's
I don't know if they have either.
tried. Like I haven't seen anything or remember hearing about it, but I do think it's important to continue to like innovate and experiment and play. But it is interesting that as great as that is, somehow it hasn't caught on more because like so many of us are reading comics through like Comixology now and stuff like that. It would be so easy
So what's interesting is that
to make it that way.
onboarding people online to the established superhero universes has actually not met with as much success as the stuff that is native to online.
Mm-hmm.
So there are works that play with multimedia in this way. A lot of those vertical scrolling webtoons will have music composed especially for them. There is the great, and I was gonna read it before we did this episode, but I'm just gonna kick it down the road.
Are we saying the word that I'm we dare
Say it
not
on
say?
3. 1,
Right.
2, 3.
Oh.
Homestuck.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So Homestuck comes along.
I don't mean to be
in
mean to it. Oh.
2012. No, it doesn't. It kickstarts in 2012. It comes along before that, and
That was the first time I felt really old.
has shaped like a whole generation. I know at least one of our Shield of Tomorrow fan artists is maybe watching right now and has been like randomly talking about Homestuck again lately, and I've been like giggling behind my hand because I knew this episode was coming.
I really enjoyed Homestuck. Like it was.
Did you read?
you
Have
read
you
it?
read all of Homestuck?
No, I didn't read all of it, but I've
I've
read.
begun it. It's so long, y'all.
It's
It's
so there's
8,000 pages
so
long.
much.
But
It's
like,
8,000 pages
it's
long.
just so inventive and like
Check please or Homestuck?
Homestuck.
Okay.
Check Please, I also enjoyed a lot. Like I would like.
Spoilers for what we're getting to later.
But it took 5 attempts to even start to read it because it was so confusing to me, and it took so
What,
long for me.
Homestuck?
'Cause we're
Oh yeah,
old.
because I'm old, and like I'm like, why am I pushing a
wanna-
button to read a book?
Yeah, it's
read a
Jack going
comic?
nuts. It was originally called MS Paint Adventures. It was the 4th serial under that name back when just... And the beauty of putting comics on the web is if you put your comic on the web, you are a webcomic and you're part of the community, whether or not you are like... So it's all of these tiny overlapping communities that sometimes become enormous communities that occasionally turn around, and one of the chief ways to sort of try to make sense of it is to look through when people have, like, to skip forward to the monetization question. I made a list of the top 10 comics Kickstarters, and I think it's very revealing. But I don't know what order we should go through these in.
Yeah, if you haven't attempted to read Homestuck, I recommend, if for no other reason than if you want to feel the thing of being a time traveler, like of staring at something going, clearly this is genius. I don't understand it, but it's obvious. It is obviously genius. This is amazing.
And you will also start recognizing cosplay at cons because
A whole
it's
generation.
less so now, but like there's.
It was a big. I mean, that was a generational influx. That was absolutely a generational influx.
And when they
What do you mean generate like?
Meaning you got to a convention. Every 10 years you get to a comic book convention, and there are 1,000 teenagers wearing a costume from something you have never heard of.
That's how you mean. Okay.
And then
No, that
and
makes
like
sense.
out of nowhere, they have never been to a convention before. They are just suddenly there, and they are very excited about something you've never heard of. And you either meet that with fear or excitement or a bit of both.
and different generations express it differently, where
Yeah.
sometimes 1,000 fanfics are born, and sometimes 1,000 cosplayers are born, and sometimes 1,000 like. It is not a coincidence that there's a tremendous amount of fan energy in both of those, and they're also considered female dominated.
Yeah.
Like that's an interesting element of online spaces is when people got to police and share directly with each other the things that were of interest to them. Like, turns out lots of women love comics.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get.
But okay,
Got some
so
deep
what
ones.
order? There's so much to cover.
I know.
Do we want to go on places that you can find them today, or more of the historical steps along the way?
I think more of the historical steps along the way. I think we
historical
end with
stuff is
places we can
fascinating.
find it
Okay,
today.
so how to pay for things. That was an issue.
Oh boy, I know where we're going. Yeah.
So we've made it to, let's see, the other one that launched in 1998 that I don't want to leave out is a webcomic called Bobbins. And Bobbins was the first of John Allison's now 20-year universe of his own creation. He is a British genius who writes and draws comics. He's now been stolen a little bit to print comics,
Yeah.
which has helped me to spread the word of John Allison. But he just wants to make comics, and he's been doing it for 20 years. Bobbins became Scary Go Round, became...
Wow.
I'm going to get some of the names missing. He does Giant Days in print now.
I was about
which
to
is
say
based on
he's
a
Giant
spin-off.
Days, right? Yeah.
But he has been continuously telling stories sort of based around this one little like English village of gentle weirdos for 20 years. And it's amazing, and he's a genius. But so that was 1998, the class of 1998. Y'all were pretty exceptional. So by the mid 2000s, this question of how to pay for things is big. And no one is quite sure, like, the internet has just had the .com bust. And, you know, we are a few years before iPhones and app stores and things. PayPal has, I think, been invented, but is in medium use. And essentially, some people start throwing up tip jars. And this is more sort of a historical curiosity, but, like, there was negative feeling towards this at first.
There was.
Really?
It was seen as begging.
The-
As if there was something wrong with people
So-
busking
so
on the street.
there was-
No one can remember what it's like to disapprove of someone needing money because we're all very broke now.
Yeah, it was a weird moment, and the thing that went wrong that I remember from like watching this in because I was working in anime at the time, so we were watching this in horror because it nearly buried us. Our industry nearly completely fucking collapsed.
Because of webcomics?
No, monetization. It was a conversation about art and monetization that was very, very difficult on the internet because, for reasons that are complicated and difficult, the notion of paying for things on the internet never really took off. Like all of the places where capitalism is supposed to actually do what capitalism is supposed to do, whether or not that's good or bad, and I definitely have feelings on that. For some reason, they just kind of kept thinking everything online was kind of a joke. And just sort of ignored it on this weird level, and so there was just sort of
It was a beautiful time where a lot of the internet was non-commercial in nature.
and a bunch and it caused a bunch of kids, and we watched it happen kind of, and we felt it ourselves as teenagers, start to like really have a hard time not imagining that these things didn't just sort of happen and that they should be free.
Well,
and
there's, of course, the idea that information wants to be free in terms of access to information. It began to sort of be, there's this utopian, like, you make what you can and you bring it to the community potluck and you share it with everyone. And there is still, in some ways, resistance to, like, the idea of which things, putting things behind a paywall is not greeted with universal acclaim.
No.
You will be surprised to hear.
Oh, I am.
I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah, we have.
But it did
everyone
change.
loves.
It fundamentally changed the way that people and we've had and it was difficult because every time previously that we had made a jump to a new medium as creators, there had been a lot of panic and fear about what happened to actually paying for these things. VHS was a huge, the video cassette tape was a huge panic for people in our industry and or creators because suddenly you could tape a television series. And
Were they afraid that people would stop making TV because people already had TV?
They were afraid
No.
that people were going to stop like buying TV shows on VHS because they could copy it and then just distribute it themselves.
Well,
and then like it would be panic and
VHS also like had movie studios terrified because they're like, well, now they have no reason to go to the movies anymore because they can just watch them at home on the VCR. This is going to ruin us.
Famously, Mr. Rogers addressed Congress to sort of defend the concept of the VCR.
It was a real panic and every time any of these mediums came along, it was proven to be unfounded. Until the internet. And then we're like, okay, we got
Like,
one.
well, cool.
Oh, no.
It'll never be super easy to share something illegally with everyone in the world.
And by the time they realized it was a problem, it was far too late. But like comics were kind of the first thing in there because the data is so small and it's such a beautifully simple, small thing that you can trade and give and consume. And then the minute that it suddenly occurred to you these people have to eat food, it gets a little weird.
And it's partly because, you know, some of the comics were made by people with day jobs and they were just sort of hobbies. And then, like, there was a weird sort of vestigial classism to the idea of putting out a tip jar. And so, especially, like, and there wasn't, at the time, good technology out there to do this. There wasn't good technology, there wasn't an established culture. Now we've finally reached the point where people sort of have come back around to or reinvented this idea of like taking pride in financially supporting something. It's one of the reasons the name Patreon is genius because it sort of says like, look, these people aren't begging, you are supporting them like a Renaissance god.
Yeah.
You know, like
It's how we used to do it. It's how we're doing it now.
You are an online Medici.
Yeah. Except you can be like 1,000 tiny pieces of a Medici because it doesn't have to belong to just the actual Medicis. So before any of that got invented, it got, and this probably happened in other areas of the internet, but I watched it happen in webcomics because that was where I was hanging out. Shout out to the early to mid 2000s and a site called WebSnark, which I was completely addicted to, which was the wonderful writings of Eric Burns White and Wednesday Burns White, who were drawing, like, that's just, I cannot overstate how important that was for me and a smallish in global terms community of other folks who were just hanging out. But that was an early, like, that's where I discovered a lot of my favorites and started to consider the scene as a whole and think in terms of theory about what was happening in comics and get introduced to, anyway, it was real influential, but probably doesn't go in the history books, just my personal, like,
I used to web ring like a proper human being. So.
And so,
We'll get
funding. Part of the issue also was that all of this stuff was evolving at the same time, and like it didn't have the same restrictions as a newspaper. Like nobody had to approve your content to go online. So as we found in that, I sent y'all that wonderful Shannon Garrity, one of my favorite webcomic creators and just thinking peoples, almost 10 years ago did for the Comics Journal a history of webcomics up to that point, which I still think is a pretty fantastic overview.
Yeah.
But she was talking about the early webcomics and the fact that like you didn't need 8 million people to read something. If you did a comic about libraries and bookstores, for Unshelved was that one, if like, she uses it as an example in this article, and it's brilliant because it's sort of like, you know, it's very specific, but a whole lot of people work in libraries and bookstores, and every one of them was reading this comic.
Yeah.
Because they were talking to other people who were also reading this comic. So you get around the distribution system that way, but you also don't have the controls. So no one is making you update in a timely fashion. Which means, and this was a real fear for people of like, if I throw money in a tip jar and you just disappear and never post again, like the social contract was being worked out in real time between inexperienced creators and people of whatever random ages and experience levels were on the other end of that.
Who were saying, I'm going to give you $5, but I want to continue to see comic books for the rest of my life from you.
$1. $1. We're not at 5 yet.
I was, I was always the $5 kid.
Aww.
Those dollars way too little.
So yeah, it was a lot.
I
Of,
do with a dollar.
Eaten up by fees.
it was a lot of 99 cents. It was a lot of 99 cents.
It was 99 cents.
Yeah, there was a lot of conversations.
So one landmark that gets called out in a lot of these sort of histories of monetizing is when there was. Do you want to explain something positive?
Oh boy. Okay. Something positive is actually it was definitely not one of the first webcomics I ever read, but it was one it was very dear to my heart. It is kind of a perfect encapsulation of a moment in time. I would recommend if you it's a very offensive 4-panel, surly, snarky 90s, slightly edgelordy nerd boy comic strip. I'm going with Randy here because Randy is a friend of mine now. He says
Art K. Mulholland, the author, the writer and artist of this strip.
Randy Mulholland, who's been writing it forever now. And his whole thing is he says, go to the very, very first comic I ever published, and if that offends you, that's probably as bad as it gets, but if you find that offensive, then we're definitely not for you. And I'm so sorry. But if you think it's kind of cute.
He has sort of grown up over time, at least from the outside perspective of a person who doesn't know him, and I'm just putting that
Oh no,
out
and
on the internet.
what I actually one of the things I do like about the series because it's definitely got problematic moments as it goes along, but one of the things that it does is it's the real-time evolution of this of this snarky little edgelordy kid evolving into this pretty mature, sensible adult, and his characters age in real time, and so he went from this kind of snarky telling very shocking jokes, like 19-year-old to, or however old Davin's supposed to be one of the main characters, to this guy who's kind of helping his like junior high school adopted son deal with his bisexuality, and he's like,
it takes like a really long time to get there, but
it
it's
happens
weird
in
because
real time.
Yeah. You do it's I haven't reread this comic in years. I read it when like in some of those early years, and I was frequently like, oh, I don't like that joke, and then I'd be like, oh, but that one's really funny.
Yeah,
and
no,
it was this like
it's
personal
very
negotiation all the time.
Oh, and that's very him as a human being. But like, and he admits it fully. But there's a lot of. It is a fascinating evolution to just see happen to fictional and non-fictional characters. And there are some stories in there, especially like characters that were very caricature-y at one point, where he goes back and revisits them and starts going like, no, we gotta, and like kind of going in and like going, no, what was that really about?
It is interesting because we discuss a lot of comics that sort of reflect their times, like when we look at something written in the 40s, and it is as if like the same person kept writing and drawing Wonder Woman for 30 years and like was going back to be like, You know, my depictions of Japanese soldiers were kind of effed up. Like, it's an interesting thing, and I do wonder, like, how it compares. How often does this happen in a manga? Do people go back and like evolve in their levels of maturity and storytelling, like over
Well, that's not true. Yeah, I've seen it happen before, but it's their storytelling mediums. The way that they tell their stories is so different,
and probably less dependent on pop culture references.
Yeah.
Extreme
Mostly,
timeliness.
I just to throw this into the conversation. Like I feel like.
And I might be butchering this, and I'm so sorry if you are
Well, I
familiar
mean,
with
like,
this whole period. But go on.
No, like it's just something that I find kind of interesting parallel, and this is a conversation that Marisha and I have all the time, is about South Park and how it started off like very crude and very offensive, and like all parties are like it's equal opportunity offensiveness, but like over the years, they've been on the air for 20 years also, like they're as old as Penny Arcade. It's matured and it's become a lot more political and a lot more satire, and now like in the last couple seasons they seem to be self-reflective, saying, oh, we said a lot of things that it was funny at the time, sure, but we are embarrassed and we are sorry. Like the last 2 or 3 seasons have been almost referendums on the other
they've
17
had
seasons, and it's
Interesting.
like this latest season is just
yeah,
like a crazy like
The
erasing
South
of their
Park
stuff.
and
so.
I rarely saw eye to eye, especially in the early years. But I could
Yeah.
appreciate a lot of
And-
what they were doing over time.
And I'll definitely say when it comes, because I've grown up with something positive. I still read it. It's one of my dailies. And
well, and I got addicted just to the characters. Where I was like, well,
and, like,
I
you
might
fall in
hate
love.
that joke, but I need to know what happens to them. You know,
No, and
it's just an interesting.
And like people fall, and like there are major character deaths that are very heavy, and like the main. I mean, like spoilers. It's been years.
we meant to talk about money, and we got distracted.
The main character's mother died. I mean, like, and like they move it real time. And they definitely. It was one of the first times in any comic book I saw like the hot girl character and the main boy character like just kind of go, no, we're just really friends now. That's just and like. Oh my God! You didn't
An
go there.
adult connection.
Like
That's-
yeah, and they're like, stop trying to hook us up, people. What the fuck is wrong with you? Yeah, no, Jesus. Yeah, and there's an awful lot to like, but it's definitely you'll find out really quickly if it's your flavor. There's nothing. Yeah, to give an example, one of my favorite T-shirts, because Randy once drew this thing on a napkin. We saw him when I met him, and it was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen. And he put it on a T-shirt that he forced us to buy because we said you have to make it. Which was a little girl in a bee costume. She has a black eye and is crying and says, I guess Daddy doesn't like bees.
Yikes.
So that's kind of what you're in for, except it's adorable.
Oh, geez.
It's just adorable. And you look at it, you go, no. But you're like, oh, it's a lot of that.
That reminds me of Perry
Randy's gonna
Bible
murder me.
Fellowship.
Perry Bible
Oh,
Fellowship.
Perry Bible Fellowship.
Is like
I know we're getting off, but
So the weird thing about Perry Bible Fellowship to me, like for me personally in my history with webcomics, was that I didn't even realize I was reading a webcomic. I was just like, this is great. I like this. And
I
like
think that's a more common, like, you know, I landed on a blog where people started trying to develop a critical theory of webcomics like real early,
Cannot be
but
done.
most people are just like, oh, funny things.
funny thing that I like. And like
Perry is dark.
but
Perry's dark.
Yeah, tell them.
my favorite thing about Perry is that there's an absolute formula to their comic, and that is cute, adorable, like a little like, oh, this is nice, and then like there's this cute, adorable thing has a problem, and then it ends with really stupendously dark twist that you didn't see coming.
I've got a few.
And somehow, despite the fact that they do many examples of it, you still won't see those twists coming.
No.
They
And
are
like
genius.
I know, like I'm like
Nicholas
I'm in.
Gurevich, I think Gurevich is the name.
Yeah,
it's now retired, but this is a.
It updates once every 6 months. Like every now and then,
A new
it's
one
been
will come-
months,
yeah.
and they'll just be like, boom, and I'm like, and I'll run. Yeah, I have a couple.
Like,
I have a couple appropriate examples
Okay.
that I've pulled.
And then we'll go back to the money
Yeah,
discussion.
really quickly. Like this is, you can see this is like a classic Perry Bible Fellowship twist. It is also there's occasionally sex and violence in these, and I warn you. Yeah, there's that one. I will give you another. This one, which I thought was really fun because it's such a great pull on the keep on like. It's an interesting use of mixed medium too. I'll get back to that one in a second. This is another one.
I love this one.
Yeah. And then this one I actually like. This one has actually been one of my background screensavers for years. I will actually read it for you. Gentlemen, Our waters are in great danger. Perhaps we should follow the path of the Devonian sea creatures and adapt to walk on land. Barry, shut the fuck up. I'm serious. Like,
So big.
I love the names of the Pacific Council. What was the other ones? Punchbout, Keep on Truckin', and Magic Eye.
And this is, of course, a tradition of cartooning that comes out of like that was supported by alt weeklies and other sort of offbeat sources of publication. We've weirdly come back around to where like this is the style of cartooning that gave us people like Matt Groening, that gave us people like Linda Barry, who were getting published in print, but in sort of unlikely, out of the way like news because they were never going to be carried in the Sunday
No
newspaper.
newspaper was ever going to carry
Come
that.
around to that because places like The
whales
Nib
saying
now
fuck.
are online magazines that are commissioning and supporting artists for new published work in an organized fashion.
One of my favorite Perry Bible is, I think it's a more recent one, but it's this little girl prays at night.
Oh no, I know exactly what. Yeah,
Dear,
go ahead.
Dear Jesus, please help me win the spelling bee tomorrow. And then the next panel is, Dear God, please help me win the spelling bee tomorrow from another kid. And then the last panel is Jesus like in a full-on fist fight with Ganesh, just beating the shit out of each other. And
Like
I'm
a
like,
Street Fighter panel, yeah.
and that's the way after as I was going through seminary and everything else, that's where one of the things I was like when I pray, if I pray for something and Taliesin prays for something, Amy prays for something, but we all pray for something different. How does God answer all those prayers? That doesn't make sense to me. This is they're all competing with each. How does it work?
I used to put the "Yay, today's my birthday" one with then death with the little abacus going click every.
Click.
Yeah, that was my birthday thing for years.
This might be a decent segue to the fact that even if you think
know we
that
like
you
that
don't know any webcomics, you do know some webcomics. And one thing that the internet has given us is the ability for something to become wildly influential, to achieve essentially iconic status in this traditional sense of standing in for something. So I'm going to show y'all probably the most influential webcomic
try
of all
and rear
time.
us back to something positive once that's done, because I know we got to go.
Yeah,
there.
hold on. Probably the most
Oh,
influential
that is
webcomic
that
of all
is
time.
way up there.
Uh,
I was just looking at that today.
I think
Comes
I
to
know
us
which one you're talking about.
from Casey Green.
There's technically two of them now because there had to be an update. Yeah, this is one of the most popular webcomics, I think. And it's
You don't know that it's from a webcomic, but you've seen it and you know it. It is from Gun Show by what tabs do I have open? Very sorry.
a lot of them. Never mind. Yeah.
I don't know how to. Whatever. They're fine.
Yeah, whatever.
Casey Green did a comic called Gun Show, and part of it was this was just one day of humor that has now come to stand for a whole set of ideas. And we will probably all remember this era in history because of this. I mean, beautifully
Someone's
painted
going to get that
executed.
etched onto their tombstone one day.
Yep.
By the way, before we move on, are we doing our topic tonight?
There'll be a 5 minutes.
Yes. Oh my God, we're halfway through. Please send topics, and also don't shout at us if we're skipping all of the best stuff because there's so much, y'all.
There's so much.
So-
what happened in
Copious.
2004?
So all I can say is Randy was sitting on, he was he was been doing this book because of his friend who was yelling at him that he needed to get out of his famously Clarion Harp, who was like, why don't you just do something positive with your goddamn life?
Is that where it came from?
Yeah, who's the basis of one of the characters.
Yeah.
And he was like, fine, I'm going to make a comic. And, because that's exactly what he sounds like. Look it up.
That's really sweet.
It's my Randy Milholland impersonation. I love you, Randy. Really. He started going. There was at one point it became the question is, can you actually make a living at this?
And nobody was sure. They were like, giving away comics for free, not a business model.
No.
And
he wasn't publishing books, and he wasn't wasn't making flash, and he wasn't doing any of that.
the sort of outside perspective on this, and you can tell me how valid this was essentially there was a point where people were really enjoying the comic and they were following it, but the updates were not steady. And a big part of it was if you want people to keep coming back, you need to do things when you say you will, that kind of thing. Although it was you're giving this away for free. And at a certain point, it was sort of look, if you want me to update the comic, I'm going to need to quit my job, and I can't afford to. So here's the challenge. If you put X amount of money in a tip jar, I'll quit my job and do the comic.
That was the far more polite version of his you want the comic, pay me. And I was like, if you want me to do it, I gotta I don't have time to do this.
And this
Who has
was
time?
2004, and it
Yeah.
was a sort of an accidental proof of concept for everything that
gonna
would
murder me
follow
later.
because the fans of something positive were like, okay.
Okay. Much to his eternal torment.
Oh, really?
Oh, I mean, like, and he's got a couple other books, and he was also, I mean, like, he became a big promoter of other, like, he was really, I mean, like, he's been a very, very solid champion of, like, of a lot of different books, not books, I suppose, strips on the internet. It's like the one web rink I still found existing was actually at the bottom of the Something Positive page. I'm like, yeah, it was the.
Web rings were a way of organizing the early internet when search engines really sucked, and you wanted to find more cool stuff. People would kind of band together and be like, I like my Sailor Moon site and your Sailor Moon site, and I'd like to know about more, so I'm going to join the Sailor Moon web ring, and I'm number 25 out of 200, and you can click to the next one to just get more good Sailor Moon stuff.
Yeah, instead of a series of tubes, it was a series of hoops.
Yeah.
And so you just pop to the next and pop to the next. And you could kind of go into the center and look around, but it was just a constant right click to new web pages that all shared something in common. It was a curation. It was a very, very solid curation at the time. Yeah, I'm trying to remember some of the other, like, and he even had crossovers with other comics, which I thought was really interesting. He created the first web comics crossovers, and like there were, or some of the first ones anyway. And then like, yeah, it was fascinating.
It was one iteration of like an artistic community starting to form in some senses, although they'll form and fragment and form and fragment and form and fragment over time. So that's just notable because it gets referenced in a lot of things where it would be several more years before before Patreon gets invented, but like much later, before Kickstarter becomes a thing. And of course, I have to, like, I'm sorry, y'all, I'm so excited.
Where do you need to go? Because I have things, and I know you have things. Like, yeah, I'm not ready for my things yet.
I want to talk about Kickstarter, and I want to talk about niche content, and I want to talk about taking control of your destiny, and I want to talk about Spike Trotman.
Then do all of that.
Okay.
Spike Trotman is somebody that I knew from, not knew, but internet knew her work from doing interesting random comics. Some of them from like random irreverent comics that I found because they made people laugh that were based on The Sims, and they were very messed up and funny. But they were kind of in the soap opera style. And she did an original story called Templar, Arizona.
On paper.
I know. Okay, so I'm the weirdo that immediately, early monetization models. If you have a comic and people are coming to your website, you have a few options. One is to try to get money from advertising. This has been more and less successful over time, very difficult to depend on. Things come and go and change on the internet. People use ad blocker. There was a very interesting experiment that ran for several years that Ryan North, who we haven't gotten to, even though he's massively important. I'm so sorry, y'all. I didn't think this would be 2 hours of me talking.
No, we're like.
I came in expecting 2 hours of you talking.
I have just a couple things I know a lot about. You have much more that you know about.
I did a lot of reading for context, but I don't know the history. So
I should have bullet pointed.
No, you're
my
rocking.
crazy person notes are not doing it.
We're gonna kill everyone on your list. We've got you.
Advertising. Later on, there was a combination of interesting entrepreneurial idea and community building called Project Wonderful. Ryan North started a side project because he just wasn't busy enough, I guess. He's a genius and he could do a million things. I don't know. It was essentially a way for people to sort of advertise on other people's sites with transparency about how much it would cost based on popularity, but it never felt skeezy because it was always like, it was sort of webcomics feeding into each other, and you could get a spotlight by buying a day or two on questionable content or something positive, or I don't know if it was on something positive. I just assumed it was.
I think it was, yeah, because I remember that's how back in the day, there was always another web series on top of it. So,
but again, sort of curationally, there was a good chance it really was something that would catch your eye, so it was like they had a much, at least for me, higher click-through rate than a traditional advertisement, because it wasn't like, I want boat paraphernalia. It was like, oh, someone who has a comic that they think I might enjoy if I'm reading this one. You could just basically buy space in each other's things. Anyway, Project Wonderful lasted for several years and was very interesting. Advertising was one model. Making print editions was one model. But that depends on your ability to partner up with someone, to get the things printed, to deliver them to people. And a lot of these systems took time to invent. Merchandise. This is McPedro. He's from Girls with Slingshots by Danielle Corsetto.
Hey!
Which was one of my very favorite, again, long-term, watch the people grow up and get their lives together and laugh along the way kind of comics.
I'm going to also add that Pedro's got 3 lanterns.
I don't know. I just keep from there.
So I'm just saying that we're almost to Armageddon here.
I don't know why. It's just fear, hope, and anger. But
Well,
yeah,
those are your primary emotions.
Yeah, that's right there.
it's true.
It's only 3 you need.
Merch, T-shirts. T-shirts
T-shirts.
were the backbone of the 2000s webcomic community.
And they weirdly consolidated quite a bit, which I thought was interesting.
So early on, some of the webcomics pioneers, Jeffrey Rolland, who did a strip called Wigu, created a merch company called Topatico. I don't know how that's supposed to be pronounced.
I think you're right.
I've always said Topatico.
Podico. I
which-
just bought a strip from them.
Yay! Became like just, it was interesting because folks who had the skills to kind of put that stuff together emerged and sort of started gathering people around them. And I think, I can't remember now if they also founded Make That Thing, but when crowdfunding, very early crowdfunding services came around, there immediately arose a need to be like, look, someone who's good at writing and drawing is not necessarily someone who's good at making a spreadsheet of 8,000 backer names and address and mailing stuff. Like, also that takes a lot of time. So there were a lot of growing pains as they kind of invented all of these systems. And before, people were making deals with major publishers. Fast forward to, I want to say 2012, to somebody putting a comic up on Tumblr while they complete their illustration degree and getting a book deal out of it, which is then published in 2015. And now she runs She-Ra and is taking over the whole world and is a crazy genius, but she came from webcomics. Or at least by my definition, she came from webcomics because she was putting comics on the internet. She was going to be a genius, and no matter how she got there. But these days, that's just sort of how you do things. And I've once again, Spike Trotman, comic book creator, inventive dynamo, essentially in I want to say 2014. 2013, Patreon gets invented. Kickstarter has been around for just a couple of years and has had a couple of major successes. And I think Spike had already done print editions of some of her books and all of these other things. I don't know if 2014 was the first one or just one of the big notable successes. I didn't write that part down.
Well, it's the trouble with this history is that it's definitely not a straight line because things keep going horribly wrong and things fix themselves.
That's true. But
everything's all jumbled.
What's exciting to me is that you can look back at now many years of Spike Trotman taking over the internet and kind of see this groundwork as she's got great taste, she's got great commitment, and she doesn't owe anything to anyone because she literally did it by herself. Which leads to a wonderful outspokenness that you'll also notice if you follow her on Twitter, which you should, and also a willingness to take big chances. So, for instance, she looked around at the internet, and I'm paraphrasing on behalf of what I've seen from on the outside. She's also in some round tables on Alpha. She looked around and sort of said, like, here's a thing that it doesn't seem like there's enough people doing, which at that point was sort of adult content that was mostly made by and for women. That is a gross oversimplification. But she called the book Smut Peddler. And it was wildly successful because if you don't put a bunch of stuff in the way of women going after things they want, they go after things they want. And sometimes they throw money at those things. And Spike Trotman is now the publisher of her own line, Iron Circus, who have just has raised, I think, over $1 million on Kickstarter now.
Wow.
Has books that explain how it works to other people.
Whoa.
But was basically making it up as she went. Really competently over time.
Smut Peddler was a huge explosion at the time. I do remember that just taking oh man.
So she's now primarily an editor and publisher that's gathering a lot of folks together. But it's just, y'all, there's so much.
There's so much.
How do we do this?
I don't even. Go ahead because I was.
No, I really like Perry Bible Fellowship. We talked.
Yes, and there used to be almost a joke that every time Perry Bible Fellowship reached a new audience, they flipped over it. And it's not that it ever stopped being genius, but it kept winning different kinds of awards because different groups of people found out it existed. It's an interesting, you can sort of culturally track, I think it won some major comics awards, years after it was already sort of a household name in the adjacent but not fully connected webcomics community, and it made us laugh.
I became fascinated, one of the things that really fascinated me with online comics were, and I have a few interesting examples here, although they are scattered throughout history, were the fact that it actually opened up comics to people who didn't necessarily know how to draw, who had another set of skills, whatever those other set of skills might be. And I know that sounds weird It sounds weird, I know, but some of my favorite books were not necessarily traditionally hand-drawn art. There's a huge series of stick figure books that we can talk about.
Okay.
If we want to go there, let's start at stick figure.
I really love that book.
This is I know, and like
that comic.
and I know that there's other ones as well, and I'm a fan of them. But by God, XKCD, hugely influential.
Which,
hugely
and you
interesting.
talked about the early, like when the internet was a hobby in as much as anything else.
Where else? Okay, I'm gonna. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Like this is just a thing. That
And
needs
the
to be
name
done.
of this comic is tied to that cultural era because it was just a random URL he owned because it was only 4 letters long and he thought that was cool or something like that. And that's the title of the comic. He was.
Yeah.
It worked in technology for NASA at some point as a contractor, eventually went full-time on the comics, but comes at it with a very STEM perspective, but with an incredible imagination.
And like, what a great way to just illustrate going down to explain somebody a dream you just had and having it gone by the time you get to the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah.
He
And he does have he's got artistic skills.
Oh,
he just
yeah.
doesn't need them for what
No.
he's trying to do.
And he reminds me of like Feynman in a lot of ways, like how because like Feynman was like known for like I'm going to explain science to you through like diagram. Like yes, the math is great, but here's a diagram to show it even better. Like he kind of like I feel like he does that because like I came to understand various principles of like philosophy and stuff like that through what he would draw.
A lot of technical. Also, the first usage of hover text that I remember. I'm sure other people did, but like where if you hovered the mouse over the comic, you would get a second punchline, a double punchline.
Double punch.
Do we want before I go into the clip art because that's a deep well? I want to talk about the mixed media people who are like one of the things that I was really a fan of, and I'll start with the soft one and then get to the dark one. Was like Shing's comic
Yeah.
that she did, which was called Marlowe.
Shing is
Who is
Tell them who that is.
we've talked about
Shing,
her
friend of
a
the show,
lot,
who will
yeah.
eventually be on the show because inevitably I just have to grab her when she's not busy. And for a while on LiveJournal,
Oh my God.
it was literally her. What she would do on LiveJournal is take photographs of little clay creatures that she would make, and give them a little caption.
I'm so sad I didn't know this one.
Yeah, and make these little vignettes. This is one of my favorites. The haunted
That's
house actor was just
amazing.
trying to do his job, but Marlowe was dedicated to instilling a healthy sense of skepticism in his daughter. And this was just kind of one of the many weird comic projects where, like, again, like that's not a traditional artist. The other, another big one that was not in that direction is before we get to clip art was, and it's very dark, and I do apologize for that. Although I love it dearly, was a softer world, which is very dark. So you're about to hear like this was the poetry of my life as a teenager because this would come through my LiveJournal, and it was always 3 photographs, and it was just like that's a funny one. And some of them
are just thoughtful though, which at the time was sort of like a comic with no punchline.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's
Oh
that's
my
just
God,
like
I completely forgot how much I loved these.
and there's
I used to read
so
these all
many
the
of
time.
them. There's so many of them. Yeah, I love like this is another really good one. Man, you can't throw a rock in the city without hitting a pretty girl, and that pretty much kills your chances.
Like they remind me of the Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. Like they're kind of that same
But
vein.
yeah, but somehow worse.
Yeah.
It's like, this one is like this is getting into the really darker end.
It's a beautiful rhythmic variation though, because you can see like the silent final panel
there's
has a different
yeah.
effect.
I pulled a few of them because it's just it's a very unique thing. Oh man.
I want to say Emily Horn and Joy Comeau.
Yeah. Here's it, like I kept getting them darker and darker to try and like,
Ooh.
yeah. It's,
Oh my God.
It's always
Oh
and
my
like
God.
it's always these 3-panel. I
Man,
even pulled more of them, but like
When we were
They're so
talking about this
heavy.
stuff, like I was falling in love with that at the same time I was falling in love with Perry Bible Fellowship, and I completely forgot about those. But
Yeah, they're really-
I remember spending hours just like flipping through those and like just being impressed by the depth
inventive minds,
and
like,
inventiveness.
And
yeah.
beautiful photographs, and the photographs were always. I mean, like there was always a really interesting juxtaposition, beautiful use of color, and they updated often, and the archives of these are just. I mean, they go deep.
Let's see, more taking advantage of your format.
Oh, I love the bands I like, bands you like.
This was a very like. I don't know how to explain I'm a Rocker, like, or Diesel Sweeties is this comic by R. Stevens.
Would you have considered this the art of like there's a generation of video games that look like it's very much like I feel like it's like mocking the Sierra generation on a very fundamental
It's sort of
level.
sprite art, yeah, which makes it feel like your video games are telling sarcastic jokes, which is probably part of the charm there.
The American version of the long form RPG was always a little more schlocky and jokey than its Japanese counterparts.
So this was one that obviously you made me laugh a lot. These were a lot of great science jokes that are now touchstones for commonly explained concepts. There's like there's an XKCD for that.
Boy, it's so true.
Let's see. This was just the one that you all have heard me talk about. This one, I bring it up whenever possible. It is a long-form science fiction comic where Shannon Garrity gets very, very good over the course of her time writing and drawing Narbonic. But it's adventures of mad science, but it takes advantage of, like, because a newspaper comic could have done 7-year-long, deeply engaging, massive architectural things, but their editors would probably have discouraged them from doing anything that required you to find 7 years of old newspapers. On the internet, you could build on things. You could use the same format, but build over time into these crazy epics, which they did. And then clip art. You want to talk about clip art?
Let's talk. I mean, like I'm trying. I don't necessarily know what the first one is. I remember my first introduction was because of Warren Ellis.
And we haven't talked. I wrote Freak Angels on here, so I'm gonna.
Oh my God, are we? Oh yeah, we have to talk about Freak Angels. Thank you. I fucking forgot.
Speaking of early adopters,
Warren Ellis. There was a time, and this is not true anymore. And I found this one from 2005 because Jesus.
Oh my God.
Warren Ellis for a while was a fixture on the internet. I'm really glad he's not anymore because I think Warren is a really interesting guy. I know we
he's a
talked
comic
a little
book
about
writer.
him.
We did a spotlight episode on him some time ago.
And he's kind of a classical futurist.
He's also doing Castlevania right now.
Yeah.
I was about to say he's doing Castlevania. And it's awesome.
He wrote an awful lot of near future science fiction that then came true, which, for good or ill, is kind of both beautiful and awful at the same time. And while he was on, he had Warren Ellis's blog for quite a while, which has now become more of a weekly email, which is a much easier digest. That's good. He has shit to do. And he was, God, back in 2005, he was already kind of writing the "No, really, we're all fucked." He was the first person kind of doing the "No, really, we're all fucked" vibe, which is kind of, now that we're here, sorry. And one of the terrible Cassandras on his blog, which I think fell under the grim meat hook future tag, because he had a whole thing about we were heading towards, was this character, and I don't necessarily, it's not even funny anymore, which is that he had this terrible image of Edison, and he had this series of terrible poems called Edison Hate Future. And this one says, Edison made special electricity machine for playing messages from future. In future, all messages are on a thing called worldwide interweb. Worldwide interweb is for showing pictures of cats. Edison Hate Future. And they're all dark, poorly written.
From the future where we're only surviving because of the cat pictures.
No, I mean, like, but literally, like, his Edison in these comics. I'm not necessarily like saying it's a good idea to go back and find these. They're hard to find, and I think he specifically let them die because he was basically channeling this notion of like the worst of internet troll. It's almost like he knew exactly how bad the internet trolls were going to get. And started channeling them, and so it's terribly predictive of like the worst of where we got.
I just like the way he says interweb.
Oh yeah, and
Interweb.
it's all just Edison as like the avatar of like the angry, like I hate everybody. Well, I just know what love. Like it's very visceral. But then we got. I'm going to move on to another single panel one. There was a weird vibe that all of the clip art ones do. I mean, like, is it time for Married to the Sea?
Okay, I don't really know Married to the Sea.
Whoa.
But it comes up a lot in these histories.
Yeah, Married to the Sea. It's if I recall, it's got two creators. Fucking my notes are terrible.
You think your notes are terrible?
I know,
I
I'm-
didn't bring pictures.
Married to Sea can still be found. It's still, and like it's got a very, very interesting and particular vibe. It was a one panel, and it was always they would take these. It started with woodcuts, although they eventually went more modern, and it's all these kind of very silly modern jokes on top of weird little cutouts. All those guys out there say they're looking for gold. That explains why we've been camping here for 6 days and haven't seen a single band play. And it's it's called Festival. I'll show you another one. This is one of the ones that was like very popular at the time, which I really quite enjoyed. Nature fight: turtle versus frog, human versus croc, rock versus wood, worm versus worm. Time right now. Where? Outside. Directions: just get off the fucking computer and go outside. And it was just a lot of jokes. Like here's one of the more modern ones where they started getting out of the more traditional, like into the more modern clap. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Dinosaur was another clip art one.
Dinosaur Comics!
Dinosaur Comics.
I have a little
I love this.
T-Rex at home. Okay, what's Dinosaur Comics?
Oh boy, please you take it. It's. I mean, like it is literally. It's. I don't even think they ever really changed the format of like where the dinosaurs were in relation.
I looked through quite a bit of these,
and they're normally more text
and-
heavy.
and they don't really change
The basic
at all.
concept is literally the same six panels of art. I believe there are a couple times where he's broken from the format for effect, but the vast majority of the now probably going on 15 years of Dinosaur Comics is that Ryan North put together some clip art of dinosaurs. One is squishing a house. There's another one that talks only in that panel, and has written new hilarious things with these same 6 panels for over a decade.
It's amazing.
And he's a genius, so it does not get old.
No,
Yeah.
it just
It's
gets weirder.
very weird.
Cornwall may be my favorite. Cornwall,
Because who goes there?
yeah. It's. I've got a question. Who the hell goes to Cornwall? Seriously, who the hell goes to Cornwall?
Seriously, who does that?
Who the hell goes to Cornwall?
I know.
Who the hell goes to Cornwall?
Seriously, like that's the entire.
And some of them are so like.
But then there's others where like
where they're
text
talking
fills
to
the entire
God
frame.
and
yeah.
like so that was my introduction to Ryan North, this weirdly hilarious clip art comic.
Yes.
And if y'all have been watching this show for any amount of time, you realize that there is now just like a corner of my brain that is the Ryan Northiverse.
Yeah.
So
Northverse.
Yeah, I like it all comes to a head with Wondermark. I feel, which is like the I don't know if we're there yet
just
though.
gonna do spin-offs for Ryan
Yes,
North
yes,
because
bring
in
it, bring it,
addition
we're
to like in terms of like what grows out of webcomics, Ryan North like eventually does, thank God, get stolen to print comics and do such things as the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
Squirrel girl. And our friend Erica Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
She's a friend of the show now. She's probably watching. We're so cool.
She might be busy, but it combines his genius for storytelling and love of computer science into one beautiful comic. But along the way, and I wrote this down somewhere, but then I lost it. Damn it! What year was this Kickstarter? 'Cause
it was
it's
on
one
page
that
one,
I
wasn't it?
will always remember. No, that's
No,
just
no.
my top 10. I did not bring this. Okay, whatever.
Okay. It might say on the back cover. These things tend to say things like
It
that.
might. So at a certain point, Ryan North, because one way to monetize is to basically do other stuff that isn't literally your comic, but that you have people's attention for because they know your comic, and they might want to support your other bizarre ideas. So I think this was 2013.
Whoa.
June 2013 is when this was, first edition was published. So they must have probably, 2012 is a big fundraiser year. It comes up in a couple of these. To Be or Not to Be, a choosable path adventure by Ryan North, William Shakespeare, and you. This is not a webcomic. In fact, it's kind of a video game. There was a version of this that traveled around at Indiecade, but it's
Really?
literally
Whoa.
a choose-your-own-adventure Shakespeare book where he got a bunch of the incredibly talented folks that he knew from the art community by 2013 to illustrate all of these different endings to this completely bonkers choose-your-own-adventure Romeo or Hamlet adventure.
Hamlet.
There was later a Romeo and or Juliet was a follow-up. But essentially, at some point, from this era where people kind of looked down on you if you put out a tip jar, eventually, somehow it came around that, like, if you make a thing that people deeply love, that clearly reflects your mind and your heart, and you want to take a chance and make more stuff, people will show up for it. And this was one of those sort of flowerings of, like, you know, Ryan North could have just been a guy with interesting ideas that he thinks about by himself and then nobody ever else gets to know about. But because the internet exists, he could be like, you know, I think it would be funny to take my comedic style and do a version of Hamlet that's like a choose your own adventure, but with beautiful illustrations. And people threw money at him to do this. And so I'm going to call out a couple of
may
other.
I see it? Because
Yeah.
I've
Oh my
never
God. Have you
actually
not seen
it.
this?
I've never seen it. I've heard
Oh,
of
yeah.
it. I've just never seen it.
So the year 2012 was notable for a lot of those. I loved this quote. There was a webcomic that had started in 2003 that was basically D&D jokes. Again, stick figures.
Stick figures.
Making D&D jokes. It was called Order of the Stick. They slowly, over time, evolved into like more of a storyline and really caring what happened to all of these characters.
Who basically looked identical except for what hat they were wearing or thing
They
they were
have
carrying.
different hair
Different hair on occasion.
and accessories. It's very clear.
I didn't find it on the internet. I found it at Comic-Con, would you believe?
Really?
Because they have that little booth that's always so lovely and it's impossible not to notice. Yeah, that was a Comic-Con find for me. I apparently missed it on the internet. I don't know how.
That's amazing.
It was very good, though.
So at a certain
Yeah.
point, in 2012,
12.
Order of the Stick
Ah.
did in January a Kickstarter to bring some, like, they had done some print collections, but like they were going to do, I think, a Kickstarter to do a bunch of the back volumes. And by the time that campaign ended, 14,952 backers pledged $1,254,120
Jesus.
to bring this project to life. And Rich Burlew, who makes Order of the Stick, essentially said, I didn't know there was this safety net, essentially, of people willing to come out and support, like this thing that he'd been doing for 9 years or whatever by this time. And it, like, that was the same year that Homestuck, I think, ran a Kickstarter to do a game spin-off, which isn't technically like a comics project, but 24,346 backers in 2012 pledged $2,485,506 to bring that one to life. So the Order of the Stick is still the, like, Kickstarters are an interesting metric, not because the most important comics get the most money, but
No.
because it's interesting to see communities flower and show up to support things that they care about in a way that has been only enabled because of the internet. Because that's how you get a top 10 list like this. Right now, if you go to comics all-time Kickstarter, like most funded, number 1 is still Order of the Sticks from 2012. Number 2 is Control-Alt-Delete,
Oh.
which was in 2015, they were one of the other very early sort of a lot of tech jokes. There's a whole separate episode you could do about one of their strips that went kind of accidentally viral. We're going to save that one for another time. Number 3 was 2013 for Dresden Kodak, which was known for being sort of an artistically sophisticated strip. Number 4 was in 2012, Penny Arcade ran a giant Kickstarter. And this, again, like, is not that far into there to sort of be like trying out non-advertising models for supporting
They weren't an empire
the
yet.
site.
This
Yeah,
was like a very interesting.
they were mid-empire building. Number 5 comes from 2016. It's a little thing called Check Please, year 2. Okay, did y'all read Check Please?
No.
I didn't read all of it, but I did read quite a bit of it.
So I went and read it finally for this.
And I
Okay, I feel better.
So I will say, like, the premise of it did not grab me. I was
Zero
like,
people are like,
yeah,
tell me more about college hockey and this adorable
Yeah.
boy who loves baking.
yeah. There's this boy who loves baking and is playing hockey. Not interested, but you know, Amy's excited for it, and she's never led me wrong,
No.
so I'm gonna give it a chance. And within like 3 or 4 comics, I was like, oh man, I wonder if he's gonna be okay. Like, is he gonna make the team? Like,
We would
the
all
team
die
is-
for Eric Biddle.
Yeah, I was just like for Biddy, like I was, and like, but like you also like learn hockey stuff.
Oh my
Like they
God.
actually teach like the basics of hockey for all of us non-hockey knowers.
People who live in places without ice.
Yeah, essentially.
We have to go to special places if we want enough ice to
For
play hockey.
those of us south of Canada.
So Check Please is written and drawn by Ngozi Ukazu. It is only a few years old now. I think it started in 2013 when she was graduating from Yale, speaking of being very intelligent. And Years 2 and 3, the book campaigns of Check Please are numbers 5 and 9 on the all-time top 10 list of comics Kickstarters.
Wow.
Book 3 just got funded this year in 2018.
Okay, I'm curious about something then. Hold on.
It's a story. Here's from the Check Please is written and drawn by Ngozi Ukazu. Eric Biddle, former Georgia junior figure skating champion, vlogger extraordinaire, and amateur patissier. I feel like that word means fancy baker, but I'm not sure. Is starting his freshman year playing hockey at the prestigious Samwell University in Samwell, Massachusetts. And it's basically nothing like co-ed club hockey back in the South. For one, there's checking. It's a story about hockey and friendship and bros and trying to find yourself during the best 4 years of your life. It is still ongoing, which I was really mad about when I thought that the link was broken and it turned out that I just caught up.
Oh.
Yeah, I legitimately loved it because like they could have taken it in a lot of other like meaner ways and like or like tongue in cheek or sarcastic, but it's just very sweet and vulnerable and
I will go ahead and
lovely,
spoil that the main character is gay, and you will, as an audience, get worried when you're like, adorable gay college freshman is on the hockey team. How is this gonna go? And then it just pleasantly surprises you over and over and over and over and over.
Because there's a learning curve to him being around like that level of collegiate machismo, but he catches up to it, and then like I was actually like I wasn't like full on teary eyed, but I was like I could feel the tears. I was like, he's friends with they're all gentle and lovely with him. They're all looking like he's their little brother. Oh, this is so sweet. And like there was a sense of like, oh, there is hope in the world because these college hockey bros are like super close friends with this little bitty freshman like gay kid. Like
you have to give it more time. Oh, you have to keep going.
Whenever there were the moments where he got to like hockey tournaments, and I was just like, oh, I've got to keep reading. Does he win? What happened? What? Like.
So she is a masterful writer and artist, and she's very, very good at structure, but it is mostly invisible. You will notice it mostly because you're going to come to the end of each of these mini updates and find that it is physically impossible not to hit the next button.
Yeah.
Where you're like, one more. Oh, just kidding. We're in playoffs. And that is a beautiful, like, we are now in sort of what I would call like the maturity of this art form of like long form serialized mix of comics and comic strip style. There are elements of this. There are print volumes now, but there are like minor animated elements to this. It's taking advantage of some of those tools, which is interesting because I'd love to compare it with
stuff
paper.
Like that.
Well,
Homestuck did a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she ran a lot of, and I haven't jumped into all of this yet because I just got through the archives, but the author has been running like other transmedia elements along with it. Like this started on Tumblr, which is where a lot of comics in this like last 5 to 10 years have been coming out of because it's so easy to share visual content there.
Yeah.
And she's done things like start Twitter accounts for the characters and do like other additional resources that help her move this story along. But it's resting mostly on her storytelling skills. And anyway, so that's numbers 5 and 9 on the all-time. And I find the number 6 is very interesting because it's an element we haven't quite talked about yet.
Girl Genius?
Back in 2013, the number 6 is Girl Genius, which is one of those not digital native comics. Who wants to talk about Girl Genius? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking.
I don't know anything about Girl Genius.
Oh, you'll recognize it.
You please go ahead because I haven't read it since I read it the first time and it's been a while. It's been a long while.
It's been a while since I checked into, but Phil and Kaya Folio are long-term staples of the convention and nerd scenes, but they've been doing a comic called Girl Genius that's steampunk since basically not
Way
many people
before
other than them were
steampunk is
doing
cool.
anything like that. And what's her name? It's Agatha
Christie.
It's been
You're close.
so. I mean, you visually you can't miss it. It's the glasses and the hair and like
big crazy blonde hair, mad scientist glasses, and the Spark, which is like a beautiful long form steampunk science fiction comic that really was one of those like. They somehow kept it going before the internet got invented, but it was like one of those, they need to invent the internet so this can find its people.
Yeah.
And that's how you get to number 6 on the all-time, as of now, top 10 Kickstarter list. Because they moved their whole operation to the internet back when that was not a common thing to do, and began to supplement by publishing in both forms. Okay. Sorry.
Good God. No, that was great.
Number 7 is Steve Lichtman, 2016.
I can talk to this
I had
one,
it pulled up. I couldn't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
love that comic so much. Mercer shared it with me. That's how I found out
It's a
about it.
great book,
It
yeah.
is. Oh my God, it is so good. I had no idea what I was in for. I read the first page, and we've talked about it before, so forgive us if you're hearing the same conversation again. But the first page is like this barbarian comes busting into a dungeon, and he's like, Lich King, and like he's gonna kill him. And I'm just like, all right, I mean, it's just like a stupid Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
Beautifully-
all right, cool.
beautifully
Beautifully
illustrated.
done. But I'm like, why is Mercer all about this thing? Like, I mean, it's beautiful and it's cool, but where's like, what's the angle? And then the barbarian is like, stabs the Lich, and he's like, ha ha, and the Lich is like, you're not a virgin. And the barbarian's like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, pure of heart. What do you not understand? I just gave myself to you. I'm so tired. Fine, and he like kills him, and then like it just takes off from there. That warrior is dead. Lichman walks in, meets the stoner beholder, whose eyes are always like red and just slightly closed. He's like, hey, what's up, man? But he's a beholder, and he's like most newbies, and it's hilarious. Like they're all in this like dungeon. They're all just like waiting for these. Like there's a ghost policeman.
There's a weird ghost policeman.
Like it's like
hard to explain.
What year is even this dungeon? Like there's a warrior, but now there's like a ghost cop, and he's like from 1985. Like
It reads like a dark reconstruction of Happy Days, to be magnificently phrased.
God.
Yeah, I got weird there.
And then there's a is it a Dracula? I think that's in there. Like there's
He's
a
awful.
Dracula
He's just
who
the
is like
worst.
trying so hard to be young and hip and cool, and like he escapes the dungeon and goes to college for a while.
It's just awful and creepy, and no one really likes him. And it's, it's just
it
the
is.
worst.
God, it is so funny. I think it's Dave Raposa, who watches our show from time to time. So if you're watching, hey, we love your comic.
It is a very good comic. I love the
It's
comic.
legitimately one of my favorite discoveries of the last 5 years, probably for me.
I know we're getting.
I love that comic.
I only have
Oh
three.
my God,
I have
we've
to,
got-
I know.
20 minutes left.
Oh, no.
We still got a.
We've covered a lot of the stuff that I was going to be embarrassed if I forgot to mention, which is my main standard for this.
Freak Angels was definitely at some point was worth mentioning at least.
It's in the Girl Genius School of people pre-existing pros adapting to new technologies. What was Freak Angels?
Freak Angels was once again. Warren Ellis is such an interesting cat this way, where he is constantly trying to find new ways of publishing things, and he's had a series of like complicated ways of putting things together. He was curious if you could just sort of put a book together that kind of was a webcomic, and then they would eventually collect it in proper form. But it was a traditional comic book, except divided into like, I don't even know. I'm at episode 143 right now. I actually own this as a hardcover, but it was a traditional science fiction story that was kind of just put up on the internet for free, more or less. It was
Warren Ellis and Paul Defo.
Warren Ellis and Paul Defo, and it was an experiment on different ways of monetizing, of publishing and monetizing comic books. And I'm amazed that not more people. Freak Angels is a free 864-page comic written by Warren Ellis and illustrated by Paul Defo, which was serialized weekly from 2008 to 2011, and is still available to read for free at freakangels.com. Or you can buy it in a beautiful hardbound volume version of the book. But it's fucking great. It's so great it's Scottish. I don't know why it got Scottish, but it's an amazing book. It's beautiful. It's science fiction. Teenagers with superpowers.
Well, and we've sort of come to understand now that there are circumstances where you can make something available to everyone, and people who really love it will find if you give them
Not every
ways
time.
to support them that if you offer them a nice book version, a portion of your audience who will take advantage of that. And just that by itself was not a proven idea for many years.
No.
And we've kind of accepted it now. Now, the make everything free forever indefinitely has its own flaws as a business model, which most of the internet is finding out. But it's Freak Angels is an interesting experiment in those terms. We haven't talked about
we haven't
Wondermark.
talked Wondermark, and we haven't talked about poor Jake likes onions. We'll have to wait, but Wondermark is another one of those amazing clip art. David Malky, I love this. This is one of the webcomics I still follow.
I you introduced this to me.
This one is
earlier
actually on
this
my
year,
wall.
and I really love it.
I bought a print of this and put it on my wall. This actually is
The other one that you have there.
Oh, yeah.
With the criminal is my favorite.
This is.
I don't believe it. The stove. I'm never allowed on the stove. But today, someone left a chair next to it. A chair. Am I supposed to climb up there? Is this some passive-aggressive way of asking me to? I never saw what the big deal was anyway. It's just pots and stuff, right? Well, screw it. I'm doing it. Here on out, I'm a stove cat.
Cut to the Great London Fire. And like literally, I have groups of friends where we still make jokes of I'm a stove cat.
I'm a stove cat.
Stove cat.
I'm a stove cat.
And it's like a lot of like
This one
this is I know your favorite.
genius. But you're my lawyer, Rod. There's got to be something you can do.
I'm sorry, Amos. It's pretty open and shut from their point of view.
That maniac jumped me in an alley, beat me senseless, tied me up, and left me passed out and bleeding. I was mugged, for God's sake. And what world do I then get locked up?
Nope. From Batman says you're the perp, then you're the perp.
How is that even admissible?
Exhibit A is that wonder mark, and there's always a little different text up there.
He did an entire month just about sick elephant jokes. It's like I think it's been like 6 weeks of different versions of I have a sick elephant, and like
And he's made an interesting model long term in terms of how to make money off of this. He has sold books of things, but he's also figured out like related products that people will go for, like cool puzzles based off of art that he's made.
You can order any of them also very nicely. Like you can order a strip printed, which I've done. And
it took
really
time for that to sort of grow up because some level of infrastructure had to emerge. What a very interesting comic this next one is.
Do you want to speak to this one? This is the one I was trying to pick one just to sort of show off.
Speaking of the very influential people in our lives and in the world of comics who come out of webcomics.
Yep.
Our own Jody Hauser is the author of Cupcake Pow, The Unicorn and the Traffic Stop.
Some cops are amazingly dense. Does it really look like I can drop my weapon? And why does their seeing unicorns mean I have to take a drug test? I swear I have no idea how that heroin ended up in my bloodstream.
Jody has a wicked sense of humor, and the unicorn has been on house arrest for the entire duration, I think, of...
Yeah, it's a unicorn wearing an ankle bracelet, which is really
It's a unicorn on house arrest.
It's also a lot of different cupcakes, all with various feelings depending on what kind. There's carrot cake and a carrot cupcake and strawberry cake. Yeah, they're all...
And I think, like, for Jody, it was just, it gave her experience publishing something. Experience, like, going from wanting to make things to making things. Like, she was already, she went to grad school to write. Like, she was always going to be making stuff. But this is the path that she took that helped her to sort of, like, she would go to conventions, she's a really big deal now, but it's been really fun to watch because early on she was just like, well, I've got Cupcake Pow, and we were like, we know there'll be more. And it was like, I've got Cupcake Pow and this. I've got Cupcake Pow and this, and this, and this, and this, and now it's friggin' Jody
now
Hauser.
It's like, where did I put those cupcakes?
Yay!
This is so much.
It's very fun to watch.
But it was for her, she was a creator because she decided to be, and because she made something, and that
kept making it.
Yeah.
DK Chubb says, have we touched Cyanide and Happiness yet? Which
No, it's on my list, but I haven't mentioned it.
We didn't get to Cyanide and Happiness, and I
Started
know I
in
had
2005, I think.
I know I had an example of Cyanide and Happiness around here somewhere.
Questionable content.
Questionable content. I pulled up a kind of a nice and
combo gag and story strip.
some of the Sarah Anderson,
Scribbles.
Yeah, Sarah Scribbles stuff, which is just, like if there's a way to like define the 21st century as a character, yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Erika Ishii. Yeah, it's kind of.
No, and I know.
No,
No, I would never. What are you talking about?
It is actually. I will actually say it's the closest to Erika Ishii in comic book form that I've ever found.
Oh,
That's
wow.
wonderful.
Yeah, I mean,
You're
like,
not wrong. Wow.
that I love. I do this. Yeah, Sarah Scribbles is really a lot of fun.
And so, like, there was a whole, and I've kind of underserved them in today's rundown, but there were a lot of slice of life comics, and like reflecting on life comics. Some of them were slice of life ongoing story comics. Girls with Slingshots was a little bit like that. Some of them were like just the most relatable things to come out of our time. Hyperbole and a Half.
Oh my.
Yeah. Pack all the things.
When you say all the things, you are referring to imagery that we all got and shared out of Hyperbole and a Half.
It was 2 hours to describe every creature living in the sea. I mean, there's inevitably we were gonna. I mean, like, and it's a deep well. It's a very. I mean, like.
What did you just say?
I said it's 2 hours
know,
to
I'm
describe
still
every
stuck
creature
on
in the
that.
sea. I mean, like.
You're talking about the period of creation and explosive creativity, or is this a specific reference?
No, I'm literally talking about the creation of creativity, the period of creativity.
That's beautiful.
I mean,
don't
like,
just surf over stuff like that. Okay, keep going.
vomit analogy on occasion. No, I mean, like, that's the problem with webcomics is that it was international, it was everywhere, it was available eventually to everybody, and there's just no way to take it all in. Even the stuff that you've absorbed as a human being, there's no way to just regurgitate it, and certainly not in 1 hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah, and in terms of influence, I can't go without shouting out some of the other folks who came up through Tumblr and through Autobiocomics and things like that were Kate Leth, of whom I am a very big fan, who has gone on to work in animation, in print comics, and still does like comics with a Patreon model, different folks were serialized at different like online outlets and magazines. So I want to shout out The Nib again because they are a really great modern resource that is commissioning and supporting artists in the traditional like we will carry your comic and pay you to make it kind of sense. And I think that's very valuable. We haven't even talked about Kate Beaton.
Yeah, Hark a Vagrant.
This is one of those.
Iconic.
Newspapers were not clamoring for weird sense of humor, detailed history joke comics, but the internet was. And this one of, for my money, the great genius cartoonist of all time was essentially born on the internet, where we all found and started sharing her incredible, distinctive take on everything. She now. Hark a Vagrant is now on hiatus, but we know that she can't help cartooning. She's dealt with some personal stuff, and she has turned around some like her slice of life comics lately, out of like being with her family in Canada, are this weird like, I've laughed at so many of your jokes, and the quiet poetry of this silence between you and your dad is, like she's a genius, and she's only getting better. So I'm very excited for like the artistic life that she has made. But if you haven't read Hark a Vagrant, they are the funniest thing in the universe. She loves books. She loves history. She has some very funny pop culture refs. I still have her.
They are so
She makes
smart.
fun of Wonder Woman, and I have it hanging on my wall.
You have a homemade card game in here.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
It's not. No, I didn't make it. I printed it out.
No, it's bringyourownbooks.com. Wow, this is actually very exciting.
I forgot I had that. Here's
This is a whole other
Wuthering
episode
Heights
right here.
in comics.
Yeah. There.
Just examples for Hark a Vagrant. This style will look familiar to you probably because you have seen it before, but if you have never gone through these archives, they are just incredible.
Yeah, every single one is good.
So she's a genius and a brilliant cartoonist and found her audience because the internet. Obviously, we talked about Noelle Stevenson. There's there's so much. There's a surrealist webcomic called Achewood, which while never read by billions of people, I think has gone on to influence like an entire set of creators. I'm convinced Adventure Time owes a debt to it. It is this, like somebody just brought it up the other day because there's like a moment that was perfectly captured by this sort of confusingly offbeat set of weirdos that is the characters of Achewood. It's not exactly a narrative strip, and it's not exactly a gag strip. It is something else. It is a meditation on life. The Websnark, though, the site I used to be very addicted to, he compared it to jazz, and I've never forgotten it. Where it had structure and improvisation and a mood to it.
Are we sorry, I was reading.
Achewood.
Oh, I don't know this one.
Oh my gosh. Okay. We have to show you the right Achewoods to get you hooked, because there'll be some where you're like, I don't know what's going on here, and that's
okay.
ultimately it will
part of the
join
charm.
into a larger sense of Achewood. Yeah. Okay. So what are we getting from chat? Because I have talked a lot.
I mean, we've got like 7 minutes, and we still need to do a
No!
5-minute topic.
Oh, no,
so
y'all, I'm
we
so
need to go
sorry.
do this.
We weren't going to start
My lovely
stop
wife
the Amy
will,
train.
will,
Dear God.
will be upset if I fail to mention one of her favorite Instagram webcomics,
Please
and
do.
that is Adam Ellis.
Adam Ellis.
Adam Ellis. He does a lot of just like very slice of life kinds of things. So I don't really know what else is it like. She shows them to me all the time.
There's a whole other area of digital comics that's Panel Syndicate is where Brian Vaughn has been doing his digital native comics like Private Eye.
Private
and
Eye is
Barrier.
amazing. That is such a good one. I love that one.
If someone has webtoons that they love, please recommend them, because I want to get more into that.
Oh,
and I
it's so
haven't.
cute. Oh, there's a cat licking his butt.
Are you looking
Okay.
at Adam Ellis now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know Adam Ellis. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
you've all probably seen like a comic or two, like just scrolling through Instagram. All right, so
I think it's
winning topic.
I think it's time.
We have to do it.
Yeah. So let's
It's time for the 5-minute topic on today's overstuffed webcomics extravaganza episode of Wednesday Club. I'm Amy Dallen, this is Taliesin Jaffe, this is Not Key, and what are we talking about?
Winning topic from Nerdstrom's. One of the Comics Code era comic creators has just discovered the freedom of the internet. How does the classic comic thrive or crash now that they have escaped the reign of the Comics Code?
Oh no.
Wait, so we're imagining an internet arising in the late 50s, or they're magically transported here?
I think it's more of a Bill and Ted thing. I think we have a phone booth and we can put them in it and then bring them here and then they get to publish again.
I think so. I think that there's a little leeway with the question, so I think we have to determine the way that we want to take it.
Yeah. I like that they're generously not putting the timer up yet, although you should be taking seconds away while we try to decide what our interpretation of the question is. Read it again.
One of the Comics Code era comic creators has just discovered the freedom of the internet. How does the classic comic thrive now that they have escaped the reign of the Comics Code? So I think the spirit of the question that is being asked is, Superman is created, Superman is then hampered by the Comics Code.
Yeah.
What if Superman were not? And
I think
those
graphic
the
novel gets
original
invented
creators.
Way sooner.
Was that?
I think the graphic novel gets invented and popularized way sooner.
Oh, that's true.
With the internet, you think?
I think so. Like the graphic novel in terms of long form storytelling with grown-up themes and content. Like I think that things were starting to move in that direction.
I mean, they were certainly doing like those kinds of comics in the early 50s and late 40s.
Yeah, like Matt Baker did the proto-graphic novel.
Yeah.
Will Eisner was working on a contract with God. But like, I think
they
that...
weren't commercial successes by any means. I don't even think some of them
But
even
would they
came
have
to
been
print.
with the internet? I mean, am I selling this to 1950s America or to modern America?
I don't know. I've always had a weird fantasy that some of the, especially the 1950s and 60s creators of the Silver Age of comics, who kind of got the shaft, if they got a little shafted, in a more modern era, thanks to the communication that we have now, I think we would have been A, more aware of it, and B, more ready and willing for them to kind of have launched more successful underground careers. I think Siegel and Schuster would have bounced very hard in a much better way from Superman.
Yeah.
Kirby, mother.
Oh man,
Kirby
Kirby would have
I went
gone
good place on that.
nuts.
I mean, he
on the
flourished
internet.
with the code.
I think he would have been an
found ways
animator.
to express himself.
I think he would have ended up an animator, or at least an animation director.
Everybody goes to animation, and I just want them to make comics.
We didn't even mention Strong Bad. We had an entire conversation about the internet, and we never mentioned Strong Bad. Yeah, I think he would have gotten fed up and moved over to like. I think like I can imagine him making like really fun. I think he would have taken the Infinite, like the Marvel Infinite style of like the click through
Yeah.
comic.
He would.
He would
yeah.
have.
Started like
He-
doing his crazy scrapbooking.
He would have been experimenting.
collage madness. I would have loved that. Oh.
Matt?
Like, I mean, I'm kind of stuck on the idea of like Stan Lee just like going bananas, but like again, like he was already thriving relatively well. Like
He did win pop
like-
culture.
like I mean, he kind of won. So like, it's hard for me to like think back to.
But one of the key,
Like-
I come back to the fact that the code had a lot of effects. It immediately like ruined a lot of careers and hurt people. Like we lost a lot of creativity to folks who just couldn't or wouldn't stay in the business in that climate.
Oh.
But we also cemented in America the idea that comics should all be kid-friendly, and it took like the undergrounds and the indies and the rise of shops in the 80s to kind of give other options. So if that stuff had been around sooner, then it's possible.
So, Wally Wood and Wits End, like that would have all been online, and witsend.com would have become a massive resource for like witsend.com would be our comic book website today.
I mean,
If-
I would be on the Women's Collective where Trina Robbins and the other Flo Steinberg and the like with Big Apple Comics. Like I'd be reading the slice of life stuff that the women started doing at the birth of the undergrounds. But I'd also be reading Wits End.
Yeah, but but Wits End was like that was like the collective. That was like, what do you want to write? Whatever it is, give it to me. Cool, I'll put it in my book. What do you want to write? What do you want to draw? Give it to, like, no holds barred. You can do whatever you want. Like he would have been doing that, like if he had the internet. Like if Wally Wood would have been like curating all of this. Like, yeah, give it to me. I'll put it up. We'll put it in a book. We'll
My
sell it.
Elseworlds head is still exploding. We also would have gotten the Japanese manga invasion way sooner. We would have gotten Gege no Kitaro. We would have gotten Candy Candy and Hana no Lun Lun and all the big shonen rush of like Rose of fucking Versailles. Jesus.
But somebody would have still had to translate that.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, we would have been
people-
sharing it without being able to
People did,
understand.
and people would have. I mean, like literally, that's. I hate to say the forbidden word of scanlations, but people were translating things whether you wanted them to or not.
Fair, fair.
Things just moved it.
So we've now imagined a 60s internet where the shoujo boom happens. Basically, what happens in the internet when, like in the 90s in America, when me and a generation of female nerds find out that we're not alone because the internet allows us to meet other people and we explode and take things over and never give it back. I'm very sorry, but I'm not. That would have happened in the 60s.
Yeah.
With shoujo. So cool.
Yeah, no, I think that would have. I mean, that's the thing is, I don't think you could have had a cultural lockdown that the way you did there if it were an international market. It would have originally it would have just made it impossible.
Essentially, what I think we've all come to the conclusion that if the internet had existed back then, or if we were to pull them forward and then let them go back, comics would have matured and been much smarter, like very early on.
Or spiraled wildly out of control and been completely replaced by animation, and we would have lost paper altogether in some dark, hellish, nightmare-escape monkey paw situation. I don't know.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And I think with that,
Time!
I think we have to go back to the present.
Thank you, Newstroms, for that question.
Yeah, great
this has been our
question.
5-minute topic. You can watch The Wednesday Club every Wednesday on twitch.tv/Geek and and on Project Alpha. I'm Amy Dallen.
I'm Taliesin Jaffe.
I am Matt Key.
And I ran out of time for all your favorites, but please tweet them at us. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we had, I don't even remember them, but people were very lively in the chat.
I think I'm looking for a hand waving behind it. We have a little curtain that hides the people that are running.
But
things.
I think we gotta.
I think we have to wrap it up because there's going to be some whiff society.
Stay tuned.
Whiff.
Oh, for Weef.
For-
And thank you so
Weef.
much for the long-awaited webcomics, the first of many.
first.
We'll get to all your faves. I'm very sorry if
Part
I
one.
forgot your or my fave. I will be doing for the next 3 weeks. I'll be like, I should have said this.
Jody Hauser, I saw your comments, by the way, in the chat. You're lovely and wonderful. And
Good night, everybody. We have to set up for the next show. Good night.
good night. We love you. Bye. See you next week.